Hey, it's Friday night and SpartanMag Live. Been doing this basically since about August, having a lot of fun with it. Appreciate all the feedback we've been getting from people saying that you want to continue doing this because there's certainly a lot of news still going on in terms of Michigan State football and spring football and recruiting. Now, spring football, not what it usually is. They are not on the field practicing, but we are getting to know the new Michigan State staff more so every week. And each time we do an interview with the new assistant coaches, we hear more about what they think about the players they have inherited. Now, those opinions that they have about their new players that they've inherited, they were forming those opinions 3, 4 weeks ago, but we didn't get a chance to talk to them 3 or 4 weeks ago. We're only now speaking with them. So they're giving their opinions on what they saw during winter conditioning, during film cut ups, and so forth. And I think it's been pretty interesting to hear what they've had to say about some of those guys. We'll be talking about those things we've learned from those assistant coaches. We'll talk a little bit about big picture recruiting tonight. Might get into a little bit of basketball and other things, maybe some trips down memory lane. The way this works, I'm the publisher of SpartanMag.com. It is the Michigan State website for Rivals.com. I think it says Rivals.com there. This is from the camp, some of the camp gear from last year, the Rivals.com, back when they were a three-stripe camp. Won't be any camps this year, and we'll be talking about that as well. But anyway, SpartanMag.com, that's the Michigan State site for Rivals.com. Over at the Underground Bunker message board, which is the church of what's happening now in Michigan State sports, I invite our Spartan Mag subscribers, our members of our online community, to post questions, mailbag fashion, and I field those questions. I think we've got about 15 of them tonight. I'll be going through those questions. In the meantime, the viewers here watching live can go ahead and post questions in the chat area. Usually ends up being a lot of fun. Nobody gets hurt, and we get to know each other a little bit better. And it's really a lot of fun going back and forth with our valued community members over there at SpartanMag.com. Like you guys, really appreciate your support of SpartanMag.com. So I'll get to the first question here in a moment. Also, some news around Michigan State. Sad news today. We knew about it yesterday about Dwayne Stevens, his father, Dwayne Stevens Sr., the father of Michigan State associate head coach Dwayne Stevens, passed away from complications from the coronavirus, COVID-19. We knew about it yesterday, and I didn't mention it specifically during the article when we were talking about ESPN and the article that they had about the Izzo situation with Brock Washington. I linked to the Final Forum basketball message board to talk about my thoughts on the ESPN Izzo controversy yesterday and Bill Beekman's strong statements firing shots indirectly at ESPN. That was interesting. I linked to the Final Forum message board and talked about what I thought about that whole Brock Washington situation, and also said that it was a tough time for Michigan State, and those people were mad at the world right now. Izzo and Dwayne Stevens, a sad time, and I said that news will be coming out, but not a group of guys you want to poke right now, and obviously feel bad for Dwayne Stevens, unspeakable sadness there, and thought about chasing down that story last night, but the timing was difficult with the news day that Izzo had. Didn't want to bother him. Other people have, and they did a good job reporting it, but it's out there now. But first and foremost, our thoughts are with Dwayne Stevens. Tough situation. And all the people, he was in Oak Park, Michigan, all the people in Southeast Michigan, how that's become a hot spot in all of this. If you're watching from the Detroit area, peace be with you. We're thinking about you guys, trying to do the right things here in East Lansing and across the state, and I'm sure a lot of people across the country as well. We got Michigan State fans tuning in from all over the country, and we will be getting questions from them here momentarily, and we'll jump right into it right now. Again, we appreciate everybody joining in with us. Make sure to tell your friends about SpartanMag.com. Make sure to subscribe to SpartanMag.com's YouTube channel. Give us a thumbs up. That helps us get the message out even more, so go ahead and do that right now if you can. Let's go to the questions, then we'll get into a little bit more of the news. Question number 1 from Hayden V8 from Grand Rapids, Michigan. He says, All right, what's the biggest takeaway from each of the coaches' teleconferences from the last 2 weeks? Hope they keep coming each week. Now, it's kind of a good question. Merits probably a long answer. For those of you that don't know, Michigan State's assistant coaches have been available for teleconferences, and we've had coverage at SpartanMag.com. Courtney Hawkins, the wide receivers coach, and Chris Kapilovic, the offensive line coach, they were available this week. Great teleconferences there. We have the audio from Hawkins over at the SpartanMag.com Underground Bunker message board. We will probably have the audio of Kapilovic soon as well. Last week, Scotty Hazelton and Jay Johnson were available for teleconferences. Those were interesting as well. So Hayden V out of Grand Rapids wants to know what I feel are the biggest takeaways from those teleconferences. Now, all right, Hawkins went a couple of days ago. I thought Hawkins did a good job. He was interesting the way he voiced how much it meant to him to be back at Michigan State as a coach. Of course, he played at Michigan State in the late 80s, early 90s, that era helmet. And I thought it was interesting that he said it was a bucket list for him to coach at the college level at some point, especially Michigan State. He's done a great job at Flint Beecher. Tough situation there. He's a great leader there. You talk about a community leader. Courtney Hawkins as the football coach and athletic director at Beecher for a long time. Like he said, one of the 5 most disadvantaged school districts in the state, and he was doing a little bit of everything. Now he moves on to focus on wide receivers. He was an NFL wide receiver. It's going to be fun watching him there. But the way he described Michigan State and coaching in college as a bucket list and talking about how it gives him goosebumps to be coaching at Michigan State, that's a big deal. I mean, we knew that was probably the case with him. I thought that he voiced those feelings really well. And he gives the staff, along with Harlan Barnett, a lot of that Michigan State, that good old alma mater stuff. I mean, fighting for your university. And all these assistant coaches are good ones. And of course, Mel Tucker went to grad school at Michigan State. But I remember talking to Tom Izzo about this a month or so ago, 5 weeks ago, when Michigan State was looking for a football coach. He thought it was really important that the coach have some of that just dyed-in-the-wool Michigan State, program, being a member of the Michigan State community. And Izzo, that's one thing that Izzo really was interested in terms of, that's one thing that he liked about Pat Shurmur. Of course, he liked it about Mel Tucker, too, and Mel Tucker voiced that when he was introduced. And the fact that he went to school here in grad school means something. He wasn't here as long as Mark D'Antonio was, but when Mark D'Antonio came back to Michigan State, there was no doubting that D'Antonio loved Michigan State, and you could see that D'Antonio's love for Michigan State grew and grew and grew, and to the point where D'Antonio took it very serious to defend the honor of Michigan State. That's what Izzo wants. And Izzo, of course, didn't go to Michigan State, went to Northern Michigan, didn't grow up around here, but he became, of course, Mr. Spartan. So Izzo thinks that that's really important for a football coach to have that, especially head football coach. They've got that in Tucker. And Izzo was watching the Tucker press conference, and he talked to Tucker during the process. But the way Tucker described himself at the opening press conference, you saw Izzo in the front row there just smiling like a school child, just saying all the things that really resonated with Izzo. Well, Hawkins is all about that too. We know Harlan Barnett's all about that. Now Hawkins brings some of that in there. Coming from Flint and all those things, that Izzo's going to love that too. And but Hawkins is big into that. As an outsider, as a member of the media, I would not have known that was as big of a deal as it is. But to hear Izzo talk about it and how important he thinks it is, and who am I to argue with Izzo about that? An important aspect of it. Hawkins, you knew he was a Spartan dog, but the importance of that, bringing that, and it'll help permeate throughout the staff. That was good. That's one of my takeaways. I'm still not sure how Tucker went about it to put the bug in the ear of Courtney Hawkins. I'm sorry, who put the bug in the ear to Mel Tucker about Courtney Hawkins. Hawkins talked a little bit about when Tucker came to him and mentioned it to him and how excited Hawkins was to be considered for the job, how excited he is to take this job. But it's really interesting. I haven't really nailed it down in terms of whether Hawkins was a guy that Tucker always had in mind or if someone brought it to his attention. Was Harlan Barnett part of that? I don't know. That's part of the story. I don't know. Um, the other takeaway about Courtney Hawkins' teleconference, he says he wants to do everything he can to recruit and help Michigan State win. He's excited about recruiting. That's a question that I asked him. You know, he's been a high school coach for a long time. He's wanted to be a college coach. Now that he gets his chance, the recruiting piece of it is different. It's new. He's excited about it. He's going to be recruiting a little bit in Flint, of course. He's touched base in Detroit a little bit. So that's what remains to be seen is the recruiting grind when it becomes a grind. You know, he's always been a hard worker. Everyone knows that, and an extremely organized and principled person at Flint Beecher. Now he needs to put that energy and those organizational skills to work on the recruiting trail when they're able to get back on the recruiting trail. He's got those NFL experiences as a former player. Um, there's honestly, there's not a lot of former NFL players that are assistant coaches at the major college level. You would think there would be a lot of them. There's some out there, but not a ton. Hawkins has that. He'll be able to recruit to that. He's excited about it. You will find out when I find out how he's doing once those wheels start going. So those are my takeaways as far as Hawkins goes. Now, as far as Kapilovic goes, some of his quotes talking about the offensive linemen, the guys that he's inherited. Also, one more thing backing up to Hawkins. When Hawkins says, he said, quote, this group, talking about his wide receivers, he says, this group is going to surprise some people, unquote. This group is going to surprise some people. So he believes in these wide receivers. He watched them on TV closely last year as a former Michigan State player, Michigan State alum. You know, he knew all about Trey Mosley. And he's pretty excited about Jaden Reed, the transfer from Western Michigan, as are a lot of people. But he says they're going to surprise some people. So he knows the game. He knows Michigan State. He knows these people. So I'll take him at his word on that one. Now, you know what? I got to move something. I've got a lot of helmets here, but you know, I always loved the Penn State helmet. Um, but back when I was a youngster, I liked Chuck Fusina and Blackledge and Jimmy Cephalo and all those guys and Kurt Warner. I liked a lot of college football teams, but anyway, I liked Penn State and what they stood for, what they used to stand for, and I like their helmets. So I got the helmet. Now, usually those helmets up there, you can't really make out what the other ones are, but Penn State. I don't dislike Penn State, but I know some of the Michigan State people, especially in the former staff. Uh, you know, there were some rivalries there, of course. One time I had a baseball hat on, and it was from Gander Mountain. Remember Gander Mountain? I think they're still in business. The one in Lansing closed down, but it was like a hunting, fishing, camping superstore type of place. I had a Gander Mountain hat, and the logo was like it was blue and it was white, and the logo was like a bird flying, like an outline of a white, like a hawk or something. And from a distance, I guess it looked like the Penn State logo, the Penn State Nittany Lion logo. And one of the former staff members, I wore that hat over at the Scandalaire Center it was in the summer for post-practice interviews, and one of the assistant coaches that get along with these guys pretty well. They're basically people you see at work because I work there, they work there, see them, whatever. And a guy comes over and goes, he looked at me and goes, "What do you got on?" He goes, "Oh man, I thought that was a Penn State hat." They don't care if you wear a Gander Mountain hat, but if I'd been wearing a Penn State hat, they wouldn't ask me to take it off, but I might have gotten a sideways look. Of course, I wasn't wearing a Penn State hat. But as I looked at the screen here, I saw that Penn State helmet up there. And by the way, the coach that was kind of jostling me about that, he's no longer on the staff. But I looked up there and I saw that, and I don't want to make you guys angry either. So I put the other helmet up there. The helmet that I put up there is the Hamilton Tiger Cats helmet. And I don't think any of you guys are anti-Hamilton Tiger Cats, are you? I know Chris Fry is not if he's watching. Chris Fry still, I think, still property of the Hamilton Tiger Cats. Played for him last year, season-ending injury. Anyway, all right, Kapilovic. Also, he was talking about Kevin Jarvis. Kevin Jarvis is back, missed, 10 games last year, season-ending injury, knee injury against Arizona State. Kapilovic described Jarvis as a leader. Sounds like he's healthy too. Heard a lot of things about Jarvis. I mean, we've seen Jarvis played well over the years. Was honorable mention All Big Ten as a freshman. The fact that Kapilovic says that the guys seem to view Jarvis as a leader. I thought that was good. Jarvis getting older, been around a while, able to redshirt last year. It's the first time I've heard Jarvis and the word leader attached to him. That's a good thing as Jarvis continues to move forward. Still a lot of talent on that guy. You know, he mentioned that our Curry is moving around the field well and said he looks good. So, you know, our Curry, I thought, gained some traction in some ways last year. Athletic guy, passes the eye test in terms of looking like an offensive tackle, moves well, had some good moments last year, but he was just getting his feet wet in terms of being a starter and a regular on that offensive line. It's good to hear that, or to hear indications that our Curry has followed up with what was a good winter. So that was one of the takeaways in talking with Kapilovic a couple of days ago. I also thought it was a takeaway the way Kapilovic was talking about how committed he is to Mel Tucker. Now, Mel Tucker in year one at Colorado hired Kapilovic from North Carolina. Kapilovic had a really good run at North Carolina. They had some really good offenses. He had a really good offensive line. I think it was in 2015. They were a finalist. They might have won the National Offensive Line of the Year award that year. So Tucker did a good job to get Kapilovic at Colorado. That was good. Good on Tucker, good on Colorado. Then when Tucker came to Michigan State, Kapilovic was one of the first guys he hired, I think the third guy. You might remember that I had the podcast with Artie Mangum, also known as Jesse Mangum, on the Skull Session podcast. He's the father of Jaron Mangum, who had an excellent season at Colorado last year as a freshman tailback. He's from Detroit Cass Tech. Talked to Artie, I don't know, about a month ago. We talked about Mel Tucker and the staff because his son plays there, and Artie was an all-conference linebacker at Bowling Green. I went to high school with Artie, know him really well, known him for a long time, former teammate. Anyway, when Tucker was first hired, Artie told me via text, he's like, Kapilovic is a guy he's going to be bringing with him, you watch. So Artie, with his son being a running back, Artie was very impressed with the offensive line coach at Colorado. He being Kapilovic, he said he'll hire him. He was right. Kapilovic, an immediate hire. I would go as far as to say that's a big-time offensive line hire for Michigan State. And they've had some great ones here over the years. You know, Stoutland went to Alabama, won a national championship. Pat Rule went to USC, won a national championship. Roshar had some good moments. Bowman was here, went to Ohio State, won a national championship, came back, went to the playoff, had some good runs. Well, when he came back, he was a tight ends coach last year, offensive line coach. But everybody knows Bowman was at the end of his career. Kapilovic is getting up toward the zenith, the peak years of his career coming up. A lot of energy, strong recruiter, good one. And his quote, Kapilovic talking about how committed he is to Mel Tucker. This is what Kapilovic said about Tucker. He said, I just feel like he's got a really good plan. He's a guy that won national championships, and he's been a leader or coordinator at the highest level. I really feel like he has a good pulse for how hard to coach guys and how hard to push them, and also know when to pull back. I noticed right away when we were at Colorado how much the kids respected him, and I think that's important, that you know the team is going to respect and play hard for their head coach, unquote. Kapilovic, I mean, he's good with his words, obviously, but tremendous support of his head coach there. Why did Kapilovic come to Michigan State? To be with Tucker. And why did Tucker want him? Because he's a heck of an offensive line coach. So that was my takeaway from Kapilovic. Takeaway from Hazelton, I'll speed this up a little bit more. He was attracted to Tucker. Had never coached with him before, but Tucker's got a good name in coaching circles. Interested in coaching for Tucker. Liked the Michigan State reputation, Michigan State history. Michigan State's reputation is a defensive school, so Hazelton a chance to coach for Tucker and be coordinator at a place like Michigan State. But by the same token, one of my takeaways was that Hazelton didn't want to come to Michigan State if the personalities weren't quite right. He knew that Harlan Barnett was already here. He knew that Tressel was already here. He wanted to come in, meet those guys, make sure it wasn't a problem in terms of having too many cooks in the kitchen. And I predicted when they were looking at Hazleton that wouldn't be a problem because Tressel and Barnett are good guys, agreeable guys. I do think that they might have trouble keeping Tressel because he's going to be in demand, I think, after next year to be a coordinator somewhere. We'll see how that turns out. I don't want to put that cart too far ahead of the horse, but that's something that I've been thinking about. Anyway, so Hazleton was attracted to Michigan State, but he wasn't going to make a haphazard decision. He wanted to come in and check out the personalities. That was interesting. And also in terms of the players and what they want to do at Michigan State about their scheme, he was saying, more so than scheme, he says, I want to do what they're good at, unquote. Do what the players can do and do well. And that goes along with Tucker and his philosophy, and it goes along with Jay Johnson and his philosophy. He's the offensive coordinator. You're seeing that across the board now. So Jay Johnson, the takeaway with him, emphasis on same type of thing. He's putting emphasis on being able to do a little bit of everything, be balanced, be multiple. Those are buzzwords. A lot of coaches want to be multiple. And but watching what they've done at Colorado and what he did at Minnesota back in, I think, 2015 or 2016, truly multiple. They'll go power, not always with a fullback, but with tight ends, counters, zone, run downhill, play action boot like Iowa. Once you get the outside zone established, they'll go deep. Do a little bit of everything. Now, when you say multiple, a lot of people think multiple means they're going to have multiple receivers and throw it on every down. That's not what multiple means. He wants to be balanced too. But Jay Johnson with his teleconference, he says he puts emphasis on also being able to run the ball when you need to run the ball. That's something Mel Tucker talked about last year at Colorado. That's something Nick Saban used to talk about. Being able to run the ball, the 4-minute drill, goal line. There's a lot of fancy offenses out there that do a lot of great things, and certainly LSU was state of the art last year. Not a lot of teams are going to be able to replicate what they had in terms of talent, but running the ball is not going out of style. Some people do it from the gun, spread. Georgia, they'll get under center, they'll run it downhill. Colorado last year, they'd get under center, they ran it downhill. That's something Tucker wants to do, something Jay Johnson wants to do. They did it at Colorado, they did it at Minnesota. Minnesota got under center a little bit. Colorado got more than a little bit. Got under center, quarterback under center rather than shotgun under center at Colorado maybe 10, 12 times a game. Last year with Michigan State when Brad Salem taking over, I'm not sure they went under center once all year. Colorado will mix that in as part of being multiple. Jay Johnson, interesting quote. He says, in some games, we might lean a little bit more on the throw. In other games, we might be a little bit more on the ground. But we're open to being multiple and as balanced as we can be to put some points on the board, unquote. So there's some strength in there that some games you might be more run-oriented, some games you can be more pass-oriented. That is balance at its best. Not a lot of teams can arrive at that level. I know Harbaugh's tried to get there at Michigan. There were times when Dave Warner first took over at Michigan State, early in his career where they were in the shotgun and throwing it a lot. Like the first game of the Rose Bowl year, to the point where D'Antonio mentioned, hey, we need to get back to who we are. Remember when D'Antonio said that? If anything, I think he thought that Warner was going to the throw game too much shotgun. So they dialed that back. And throughout the course of that season, because of what they tried to establish early on, and it wasn't so successful early on, but they still had that in the playbook. It's still something the opponents had to get ready for. They settled down into becoming ground first and hit you with play action, get ahead in the chains, win field position with their defense, take some shots, and they won a lot of games that year. They were a great team that year. In the Rose Bowl against Stanford, a very, very good Stanford defensive front. Michigan State could not run the ball against Stanford. They could have tried all night. They were not going to be able to run. And with the run game not there, the play action was not as effective as it normally could or should be, because couldn't get people to bite as much on the play fakes. A little bit, but not much. against Stanford, Michigan State that night in the Rose Bowl, had to revert back to a lot of shotgun, a lot of the things they did on opening night, some things that were criticized a little bit. Frankly, I criticized it a little bit. Just that, they were getting away from who they were, and it wasn't working all that well. I thought that they kind of Warner was excited to be the offensive coordinator, maybe even overcorrected. When you guys think about Warner now, you think about him being a conservative type of coach. A lot of you guys were critical of him. I necessarily wasn't that. I wasn't critical of him coming down the stretch. We've been through that a lot. I'm not going to get back into that, and I don't disagree with what you're saying, but he was also offensive coordinator in 2014, one of the best offenses in school history, statistically the best. So against Stanford, they reverted back to a lot of the gun stuff that they had installed and had ready to go opening night. It didn't look good on opening night, but they went back to it, and it helped them win the Rose Bowl. Anyway, in terms of being multiple, Jay Johnson being able to be talking about wanting to be able to hurt a team through the air for one game and on the ground maybe for another opponent. In other words, attacking what the opponent's weakness might be. And if you're strong in both areas, that can be an ideal type of situation. I don't want to compare it to the NFL, but that's one of the great things that the New England Patriots have been so great at over the years. They'll come out one game, they're a two-back I formation, two backs tight end, 21 personnel team that can pound you. Back in, I'm talking 6-7 years ago. Come out the next week and they're a 4 wide receiver team. I know that's NFL, and they've got veterans they can just soak those guys with mini camps, and they can have a playbook that thick in that league. College guys, you're losing your seniors. You're having to use younger guys. You can't have as thick of a playbook. I understand all that. But anyway, in a perfect world, Jay Johnson wants to be multiple, and that sounds pretty good. They'll go under center. Sometimes they might even huddle a little bit. They always huddled at Minnesota in 15. A little bit of Colorado, not much. But, they were wanting to establish the run. Tight ends on the field. I watched their game against Nebraska closely. Went back and watched it again last week. And Nebraska got out to a 17-0 lead in that game. That game was at Boulder, and Nebraska seriously had more fans at that game than Colorado did. 17-0 is very uncomfortable. Colorado came back and won that game. Colorado scores, cuts it to 17-7. I think was that late in the second quarter, early third quarter. Turning point of the game is when turning point of that game when Colorado beat Nebraska. Colorado ran a flea flicker from their own 4-yard line. Down 17-7. Hand off to the running back to the quarterback, deep. Touchdown, 96 yards. This was after being under center. I mean, the offense would have looked maybe like a Dave Warner type of offense in terms of what they were trying to attack with most of the game up to that point. But in terms of being multiple, that was multiple for sure. All right, let's see if we've got some questions here. That was a long answer, and but I'll do that sometimes. Some people might not like it, but that's the way we do it here sometimes. Let's see. I don't know if I'm seeing. Here we go. I thought I saw some criticisms rolling in. I wanted to address those, and that's okay. I can handle criticisms, but I don't know. I don't want to sit here and read them all. I'll read them one at a time. I'll get to those in a second. Now, we'll stick with the mailbag here again. Alex in Los Angeles asks, what are your thoughts on William Peagler? William Peagler is Michigan State's new running backs coach. Alex in Los Angeles says, he seems like a good recruiter, but does he have any background with running backs? Also, how do you feel about Ross Els taking over as linebackers coach over Tressel? Really good questions there. Really good questions. Now, as far as background with running backs, Artie Mangum had a good point about that also. He predicted that Peagler would come with his staff. Peagler took over as running backs coach at Colorado last year for about 3 or 4 weeks when their running backs coach was out with health reasons. Who was the running back coach? Was it Westbrook? It was a guy that used to play at Colorado. Anyway, Peagler was a graduate assistant was a graduate assistant. He was a quality control coach for Colorado. He moved in to be running backs coach for 3 or 4 weeks, and Artie, whose son played at Colorado, really liked what Piegler did. Now, Piegler, 34 years old, he was director of quality control last year at Colorado, and this is the 5th time he's been on a staff with Jay Johnson. So Jay Johnson, offensive coordinator, obviously comfortable with Piegler, obviously ready to elevate him up to a position coach to be running backs coach. So Piegler was with Johnson now at Michigan State. He was also with him at Colorado. They were together at Georgia when Johnson was an analyst at Georgia, and they were together at Minnesota when Jay Johnson was offensive coordinator at Minnesota. They were also together at Louisiana Lafayette. Now it's just called Louisiana, the Raging Cajuns. And I think they won the Sun Belt that year. And on his bio, Piegler was given a lot of credit for helping Louisiana have the #1 recruiting class in the Sun Belt, for what it's worth. But you're talking about some connections in the South and connections in Louisiana, connections in Georgia. I think he was a graduate assistant at offensive line at Georgia also. Previously, Piegler was at Coffeyville Community College in Kansas, and there in 2014, you're talking 6 years ago, and he's 28 years old, he was run game coordinator and recruiting coordinator. So a guy that's made an interesting rise through the coaching ranks at the age of 34, these guys that have been around him for a long time feel that it's time to go ahead and give him this type of job, this type of program. I'm trying to think where Dan Enos was when he came back to Michigan State. He was at Cincinnati prior to that, but probably around the same age. Maybe a little older. Now, Enos had bounced around at smaller schools like this, like he'd been at Northern Michigan. But similar trek in that regard. But the running backs background you're asking about, like I said, last year coached Colorado a little bit at that position. Also, 34 years old. Last year the best assistant coach in the country was that Brady guy at LSU. He's 30 years old. I'm not making a comparison other than sometimes a young coach getting his break might be someone who's impressed some people in the film room, on the chalkboard, in the recruiting aspects of it. Joe Brady was 29 last year when he was hired. Prior to that, Joe Brady he played at William and Mary for 4 years. Joe Brady, he had 1 career reception in 4 years as a wide receiver. Then he coached at William Mary for a little bit. He was a GA at Penn State for 2 years, Joe Brady was. And then he went to the New Orleans Saints for 2 years. And then, as everybody knows, he was at LSU as LSU was tapping into the Saints coaching staff, asking the Saints to help teach LSU some of the RPO game that the Saints were doing. And so they sent Brady, who was a wide receiver assistant from the Saints, and he showed Orgeron and those guys. And they were so impressed with him, they just hired him. Give credit to their coaches for not feeling threatened by a young guy coming in. And he came in and did some things. I'm still looking into that because when I watched LSU play, you hear about the 10-2 stuff with the quarterback read the vision. I mean, yeah, there's RPO stuff, but a lot of people do RPOs. Yeah, they ran the ball. A lot of people run the ball. Yeah, they throw it downfield, and they threw it on 3rd and 17 when they were up by a touchdown against Texas or whoever it was they played early in the year. I always wanted to ask Brad Salem about that. If I see him again, I want to ask him. Just people that are in the coaching profession at that high of a level to ask them, Brady was getting a lot of pub at LSU for being some whiz kid, and he was a whiz kid. He did a great job. But I didn't see anything that was revolutionary. I thought it was a lot of mainstream stuff. They had great talent. I mean, that quarterback, people compare him to Tom Brady in terms of the reads being correct and on time right now and accurate. I mean, you hear like Gary Danielson and those guys talk about him and Herb Street. So you have that quarterback, and that tailback was great. He'll be one of the top 3 running backs taken this year, 3 or 4, and those receivers. I mean, great talent, in my opinion, doing mainstream things. Maybe they were doing mainstream things with some add-ons and some tangents that are over my head that I didn't understand. Sometimes you don't know what you don't know. Sometimes I don't know what I don't know. That's why I wanted to ask Brad Salem about it and just ask him and say, hey, man, tell me explain this stuff to me. What was so revolutionary and unique about what LSU did on offense, because it looked pretty mainstream to me, but of course they did it really well. But anyway, the LSU coaches loved him, brought him in. He was there for 1 year. Now he's offensive coordinator, Carolina Panthers at 30 years of age. I'm not comparing Pegler to that, but sometimes a younger coach, some of these younger coaches have garnered a lot of respect, and they need to get their chance and get their breakthrough. So Pegler gets his chance, and he's hitting the ground running. They're expecting him to do a good job with recruiting as well. I'm going to go ahead and send a tweet out to invite people to come in. Helps promote what we're doing here a little bit. So give me a second. I had this thing ready to go. Now, where'd it go? Rats. Here it is. All right. If anybody wants to retweet that, that'd be appreciated. Let's go to the chat area here and see what we've got in terms of some of the contributors. I got to change a few things here also. All right. I'm having trouble finding the top. Okay, here we go. The Untitled Beer Ranking Show says, "What's up, comp?" That's Callie Spartan, I think, right? Good to see you. Everybody go check out his podcast. That's a fun one to watch. Kyle Tonsil says, "Comp, how you doing? Good to see you." Untitled Beer Ranking says, "I wonder how guys are going to maintain their fitness in terms of weight gain or loss. You hear any plans on that?" It's a good question. It's a good point. The assistant coaches are excited about the way a lot of guys are being creative and keeping themselves in shape. I've talked to some people that have players on the team, parents of players, and also former players, and they think that the guys will keep their strength up, but there's a few that, conditioning wise, it's going to be hard. I mean, Ken Manny used to get these guys out and have them run as a group, fourth quarter program. Not easy. I mean, I didn't do it. I don't know what it's like, but not easy. And everybody in the country does that. And I mean, human nature, if you're on your own doing it, you're just not going to push yourself as hard as you would if you were with a group of teammates, with a strength coach, with a whistle, making you do it day after day after day. Maybe some special ones can do it, like, Walter Payton, when he famously ran up that hill in Mississippi or wherever it was to become as great as he was. Some of those special guys probably don't need that daily incentive, but they're not going to have it. And players all over the country are not going to have it. So they're trying to hold each other accountable. They're showing what each of them are doing. But really, the only people that know for sure whether they're working out enough are those players themselves. So your question is, how are these guys going to maintain their fitness and their weight gain or weight loss? They're not. I think across the country that it's going to be, there'll be some guys that come back in good shape. There'll be some guys that come back out of shape, whenever that happens. But you raise a good point, and that's one of the X factors in college football for 2020, depending on when they get back on the field again. We'll see who. I don't know, man. It's going to be strange. All right, Old Tuck chiming in. John G. from Mason, Martian Mambo, he's on the road, says, thanks for the stream. It was this or Tiger King. Well, John G., glad you're here. And let's go back to the mailbag, go back to the SpartanMag mailbag. Brian from Lansing via Salt Lake City. We will get to his question in a moment. But first of all, a little bit of news. Michigan State sports camps canceled today. They sent out an email. Not a big surprise. I've been anticipating all summer that this would be a summer that we would not be able to get out to the t-shirt camps. And that's going to be tough for Michigan State recruiting, and there's a question in the mailbag about that coming up shortly. Punting situation, there was some movement for Michigan State at the punter position. Uh, Jack Bomeister, redshirt freshman from Australia, was the leader in the clubhouse to become the punter in 2020. He was here for half a year, traveled with the team, I think, once or twice, watched him in pregame a few times, looked like a punter, has a lot of talent. He says he loved his time at Michigan State, but had a lot of homesickness situations and had some personal situations he needed to straighten out. So he went back to Australia. So Michigan State was without their scholarship punter. They went out and got a grad transfer, Mitch Crawford from UTEP. Corey Robinson doing a great job. Corey Robinson had the scoop on that one at SpartanMag.com. Great job by Corey Robinson all the time covering Michigan State recruiting. Great job. Jason Killup as well, Spartan Insight. Good job with that. Paul Konerdijk doing a great job with his articles this week covering some of the teleconferences and other things. But Crawford coming in from UTEP. Crawford, what he averaged about 39 yards per punt last year. Not great, but, an experienced guy. A guy that'll do the rugby punt. I think either way, right or left. I'm not sure about that, but experienced guy, reliable guy. Meanwhile, Tyler Hunt is still around. Tyler Hunt averaged, 41 yards a punt, maybe 40 yards a punt on 15 or 20 punts last year, or 2 years ago when Michigan State used, 5 different punters after Hartbarger had gotten injured at Arizona State. Then Hunt came in, and Hunt went down with an ACL in practice. And then that's when Michigan State went to Bryce Behringer. Bryce Behringer, as you know, was an Illinois guy, transferred to Michigan State, tried out, then was kind of invited back in the summer, but not invited back for the spring, hung around. When those punters were injured, they went back to Behringer and said, hey, man, we need a punter. Come out for the team. 6 days later, he's punting against Indiana. Behringer was not great. I mean, he averaged like 32, 33 a punt. Could that improve over the course of time? I'm not sure. Behringer last year left the team after Hartbarger was back, and Bomeister was regarded as the punter of the future. So Behringer pretty much quit. And then he quit. He joined the portal, wanted to transfer. I'm not sure how much attention he got as a transfer candidate. Stayed at Michigan State. As he says, Michigan State was always the school Behringer always wanted to attend, whether he was an athlete or not. Was at Michigan State. Then the Bomeister thing happened, and Behringer was invited back to the team at some point during winter conditioning. So he's still in the hunt. Also, Tyler Hunt's in the hunt. Behringer's in the hunt. Crawford helps add some talent to that talent pool. It's going to be a competition. Crawford will come in, I assume, with a scholarship. Just going by numbers, I have a feeling that Tyler Hunt might win that job. Just a hunch. I don't know. All right, so that's some of the news. Let's get back to the mailbag here. Maybe we'll do some more news here in a second. But Brian from Lansing via Salt Lake City says, Jim, do you expect Mel Tucker to take the lead and do a lot of recruiting in the city of Detroit himself to help repair some of the rift with the coaches in that area initially? Do you expect that? Also, if you can expound on how effective this tact may be, and if not, do you have any insight into which assistant coaches will be in the D the most, and which ones you think may be most effective and efficient recruiting in Detroit? That's from Brian from Lansing via Salt Lake City. Well, the rift he's talking about, of course, is the Curtis Blackwell thing. And, Michigan State, their coaches knew last year and the year before that they were going to have a hard time recruiting in Detroit because of the Blackwell situation. It's still going to be that way. Not as pronounced as it was. Now that D'Antonio's gone, Tucker's in. I know Tucker has struck a chord with some of the coaches in Detroit already, and he's a likable guy with a presence. And yes, I do think Tucker's going to be out front in Detroit. In the meantime, I asked Corey Robinson about this. I asked Corey, which assistant coaches is he detecting being in Detroit right now in terms of reaching out to Detroit recruits? When Corey talks to Detroit recruits, which assistant coaches is he hearing referenced most often? And he said pretty much all of them. Corey made a list. He said Courtney Hawkins, Kapilovic, Will Piegler, Ross Ells, Harlan Barnett, Ron Burton, Scotty Hazelton. He's heard all of them. I expected Ted Gilmore to be in there too, and I think he is as well. but it's all of them right now. I think Tucker realizes they've got some work to do. They've got some bridges they need to rebuild. And yeah, I think Tucker's going to be out front in that one. Dan in Chicago, he says, glad to see the relentless recruiting approach by Coach Mel Tucker and his staff, especially nationally. Is there any indication, one way or another, how that relates to recruiting in the state of Michigan and Ohio? Is there still a priority on talent in those two states, or are we just looking for the best players wherever we can get them? That's from Dan in Chicago. No, they have casted a wider net nationally initially, but Michigan and Ohio are still the big most important states for Michigan State recruiting. I talked to Tucker about that a little bit the day he was introduced as the head coach, and he said, yeah, Ohio always has been important for Michigan State, always will be, and it's important to him. Of course, he's a native of Cleveland, Ohio. By the way, he's been close with Ted Ginn Sr. there for quite a while. I would expect Michigan State to have some good contacts at Cleveland, Glenville. So yeah, Ohio is going to remain important. Michigan's important. Tucker has contacts in Ohio, not quite like the previous staff. I mean, Tressel's still going to be around in Ohio, but of course, and Barnett's back in Cincinnati. The previous staff, as everybody knows, had great networking with the high school coaches. Would tell Tressel and Bowman and D'Antonio, hey, you need to take a look at this guy, Le'Veon Bell. He's seriously someone you need to look at. You need to look at this guy, Joe Bocci. He's pretty good. He's committed to Western Michigan. Not many people know about him, but you need to check him out. And Bowman recruited him. There's other examples, and of course, D'Antonio did a great job with defensive backs in the state of Ohio. I always said that when Michigan State signed a 3-star recruit from Ohio at the defensive back position, just go ahead and add another star. If he's a 3-star DB from Ohio and D'Antonio signs him, that means he's a 4-star. 95% of the time, that ended up being true. So Ohio is still important, and Tucker has contacts. Tressel and Barnett are still involved. Last year, what did Michigan State sign? 9 guys from Ohio, whatever it was. It's still going to be big. Ohio's still important, but maintaining that standard could be tricky. Michigan State's sweet spot in Ohio were those 3-star guys that Michigan State knew were 4-star guys because Ohio State couldn't take all of them. Some guys like Lane, Justin Lane, he was a legit 4-star. Michigan State went out and got him. That was a big timer, and he was a big-time player. But, B.J. Cunningham, Chris L. Rucker, those type of 3-star guys that had 4-star careers, there's been a lot of them. Some of those offensive linemen. Travis Jackson, not quite a 4-star career, but he was good. There have been other offensive linemen. You know who they are. So Ohio is still going to be good. I'm interested to see if they are still going to get those like Angelo Gross type of guys. Those guys that are a little bit under the radar, underappreciated a little bit. And Michigan State goes and gets them. I'm not sure, but that was part of D'Antonio's secret sauce. And part of the reason it was his secret sauce is that he could do it. There's a lot of other coaches in the Big Ten that would have loved to have been able to do that, but D'Antonio could do it. That part of it might be hard to replicate. They'll get talent elsewhere, but to answer your question, yes, Ohio is still important, but D'Antonio, in some ways, when they were rolling, it was like an art form the way they did it. All right, Big Don in DeWitt, Michigan says, hi, Jim. Thanks for continuing to give us quality Spartan coverage during a very tough time. Thank you, Don. This staff has obviously invested in expanding the recruiting arm of the program with all the new positions. What are your early thoughts on what they are doing, and have you heard any back channel chatter about what some of the new assistant coaches bring to the table? And number 2, could you give us any early impressions you have formed of the new coaching staff? I hope all is great with the Comparonis. Thinks you are the best. Thanks, Don. You're the best. Appreciate you saying that. In terms of early impressions, most of the early impressions are from the teleconference and things that I've heard from other people, and I've mentioned some of those already. About Hawkins and Kapilvik and Piegler. and Johnson. So I've kind of already touched on all of those. Ross Ells, um, I have to get to know all these guys a little bit more, but he and Gilmore are guys that I've not spoken with much yet, at all yet, actually, for those guys. But um, what are your early thoughts on what they're doing in recruiting? I guess he means in the recruiting arm of it. There's new energy in recruiting with this staff. I thought D'Antonio recruited really well for a long time with different ways of doing it. In the last couple of years, they just kind of were solid, and it almost reminded me of, not quite to this extent, but like at the end of the Heathcote era, where a coach just starts to feel like, okay, we're going to get our guys, we're going to coach them up, we're great coaches, and we're just going to get who we get, and we're just going to keep doing what we do, and we know the people in Ohio, and we're going to get those guys. And parts of Detroit might be cut off to us, but we'll still get a couple of guys in Michigan. In the meantime, let's really try to amplify things in Georgia, which they did and did well. And then they signed 19 guys and salvaged a solid class last year. But it was kind of reminding me of the Heathcote type of thing, and that's kind of where it was. Do I want to say devolving? I'm not sure, because I know those guys worked hard at it, and I think the incoming class is pretty good. So now you get a new coaching staff, younger head coach, younger assistant coaches, excited to have their jobs. It's just natural that they're just going to be, dying to make some traction recruiting wise. And I tell you what, Tucker is a stickler for recruiting. And like I've said the last 3 weeks here, he will recruit from the front, and those guys better keep pace with him. So that is different. I think it's great. Remains to be seen how that meshes with this program against this tough schedule and all those things. You know that. That all remains to be seen. But it is different, and there's not one single way to win at Michigan State. This is a little bit of a different way, a little bit of the old and a lot of things new, and I can see why Michigan State fans are excited about it. Let's go back to the YouTube area with the chat questions here. By the way, if you just came in from Twitter, get a beverage. My name is Jim Comparoni, publisher of SpartanMag.com. Taking mailbag questions from the Spartan fans all over the country tonight. Hope wherever you are, you're safe, happy, healthy, smart, and doing well. Hope you're doing great. Thanks for joining us. Well, let's get to some of these questions now. All right, Kyle Tonsel with a basketball recruiting question. He says, who do you think Michigan State's targeting more, Carlick Jones or Kareem Mane? Whom would you prefer? I'm trying to get some specifics on this. I know they like Kareem Mane, but now with no ability for on-campus visits for the rest of the spring, I don't see any realistic way that Michigan State can get him coming out of Montreal if he's never visited here before. He's already visited Maryland and Marquette. I've got to believe that they're the leaders. Carlick Jones, the kid from Radford, he mentioned his top 6 recently when he was he Big South Player of the Year, excellent stats, 3-point percentage, assists, all of it. And the schools that are interested reflect the type of all-around player he is. Michigan State, Louisville in his top 6, West Virginia, Texas Tech, Marquette, and I think Gonzaga is the other one. So I think Jones, I think Michigan State loves Kareem Mane. I just don't know how realistic it is. Serious about Jones, and they seem to be serious about Amari Hardy, the transfer from UNLV, who has 2 years to play. Averaged 13 points a game last year, 3.5 assists. He's originally from North Farmington, originally from Detroit, played high school ball at North Farmington. He's been hearing from Michigan State, Kentucky, Oregon, Arizona, Maryland, Marquette, and some others. So I'm going to do a little more research. I tried to get some research done on that this week. Couldn't quite connect, but expect to know more about that soon. Hayden Vischer, who asked our first question on the mailbag, he's here. He says hello, so what's up? Old Tuck, coming in from Ludington, Michigan, Hamlin Lake. Don't lie to me, Old Tuck. I know you're from Austin, Texas, but I know you're originally from Ludington. That's cool. Was Josh Kerr from Ludington? Who's a player from Ludington? Josh Kerr was a tight end, Perlis era. He might have been from Muskegon. Old Tuck, well, no, he's an old. He's a '90s guy. Who was the guy? There was someone from Ludington. Anyway, Hamlin Lake, rock, bass country. Paula Levine, why hasn't she covered the U of M sex assault scandal? If that is her niche, does she have something against Michigan State? I'll just leave that one alone. Bradley Cruz says, going as good as it can be, Hayden. Love having access to these videos. Great work, Jim. Thanks, Bradley. Thanks to Corey for apparently deleting some messages. I'm not sure what happened there with Jack's Libby, but thanks, Corey, for the save. Rob South says, what's up, fellas? Sorry I'm a little late. No internet or cable. So that's a tardy for Rob South. Let me check here. I think that's 3 tardies for Rob South. 2 more and there's going to be detention. So watch yourself. Tom Coyle says, Comp, saw you in a tight, sexy shot after they won the 2000 National Championship in basketball. You looked good. Thanks. Yeah, I was behind Cleves and Izzo during the one shining moment thing. I was on the court with a recorder just kind of narrating what I was seeing for Spartan Magazine, that issue right there. Microphone's in the way. I got the microphone exactly where I want it. This will probably mess everything up. But anyway, that's the Mateen Cleves issue right there. National Championship 2000. So I was, back then the recorders were like this big because it had an actual cassette on it. Look out. An actual cassette on it. So I was following Izzo around, and as he talked to people, I was just narrating to myself for, I think, a feature story that ended up going in there. Just sights and sounds. Trying to do things that fans may not have been privy to watching at home, or even if they were in the stands. And I'm narrating it, and I'm just watching. I wanted to see what he and Cleves said to one another during that time. That was really an interesting romance between those guys. You know, the recruiting thing and the promises and getting to the mountain and getting it done. The injury, then another injury in that game. I mean, it was like something out of a movie to be there 5 feet away and witness that was amazing. And so I'm behind them, just kind of observing them, and I'm watching them. Then they strike up the One Shining Moment thing, which everybody knew. Cleves used to always say that was his favorite song. I mean, One Shining Moment's a corny song. We all know that, but the connotations with the NCAA tournament near and dear to a lot of our hearts because that's a great time of year. It's a great sporting event. Cleves always said that was his dream to hear that song played for him and his team, and here it was happening, and they're watching it at the Hoosier Dome in Indianapolis, and the big scoreboard, video board on the side of the stadium, the interior, obviously. And so that starts up, and the music's playing. So now they stop, and they're watching it, and I happen to be behind them. They're watching it, and I'm just listening in on them. And as they're watching it, all these cameras start coming in front of them to get pictures of them while they're watching it. And a lot of those pictures ended up being somewhat iconic photos of Cleves crying and Izzo smiling as they're watching that. As I look back on that, I can't believe that Izzo didn't cry. I mean, we all know Izzo's a very emotional guy. I think Izzo cries if he sees a good McDonald's commercial. And there at that moment, delivering that with Cleves, you know, we've seen Izzo, cry after he got his 100th victory and other times. You've seen it. And somehow Izzo was just all smiles then at that night, all night, winning it when they got the trophy, when they got everything. If he wins another one, I don't know if he'll be able to hold it together next time. But this one, maybe he didn't have much caffeine that day. He was handling his emotions well. And that photo, that's what Old Tuck's talking about. I think it was Old Tuck. No, it was Coyle saying that he saw that. So that video sprang back up. Channel 6 in Lansing replayed the 2000 National Championship game last Saturday, and I was watching it here with the wife and kids, and they had never seen him before. we were watching the end of it. We watched like the last 5 minutes. It was movie night prior to that. And, they showed the end of the game. Then they did a mix of some other, I assume, file videos that Channel 6, the CBS affiliate in Lansing, had. And in one of those, there I was looking younger. And my kids thought that was hilarious. They thought I looked weird. I don't know. I've seen that photo at like, I think that Applebee's in town here. They try to, they have local photos around. And usually I'm cut out, thankfully. But I'm not making light of it because it was a privilege to witness that. And witnessing it going back to when Cleves was a junior in high school, going back to when he was 16. So for that chapter to end like that, like I said, it was a privilege to witness that. Brad Fashenko says, sorry, Jim, a little late tonight. Thanks for pulling this together. Fashenko. Two tardies for Fashenko. Anyway, Coyle says, go green. Detroit Spartan says the offense set several program records in 14. Yes, they did. Dali says every team wants this type of stuff. I don't know what you're talking about. I hope you don't have any illegal narcotics or anything. But when you say every program wants this type of stuff, I hope you have a good, safe night. Let's see here. Coyle says, close to the ground, stick with comp. I'm not sure what he means, but thank you for the endorsement, Tom Coyle. Colin Meany says, Tom, what do you mean about the photo of comp? Kind of suspect. I think I just shed some light on that one. Let's go back to the mailbag. Our Griff 57 from Holt, Michigan says, have you heard the reasoning for the Big Ten canceling the coaches' Zoom video conference and coaches clinic with the Michigan high school football coaches, which was scheduled for Monday? A week later, an Iowa coach did precisely what the Big Ten told our coaches they could not do. Thanks and stay healthy. Have you heard the reasoning behind that? He's asking. I've not. And I sent a question to a Michigan State official about that, and I did not get an answer. So hope to get an answer at some point, and maybe I can shed some more light on that one, but I don't know the answer. But those of you that don't know, Tucker, who's very tech savvy, and I said here after he was hired, I heard from some people that know that Tucker, one of the things he wanted to do was to be more high-tech, out front, recruiting-wise, social media, and other, whatever technological weaponry was and can be at his disposal, he wanted to use it. So I thought it was an interesting plan for Tucker to arrange to be part of a coach's clinic video conference. It was supposed to take place on Monday, and it did not take place. Not sure why. So we'll look into that one. Cornelius Spartan says, thanks for hosting another podcast for us bored and hungry for information fans. Thank you for being here. Although our recruiting reach is much more national so far, it seems like we are offering a similar recruiting profile, more 3-star guys than 4 stars. Have we really upped our game on the quality of recruits? He asks. Interesting question from Cornelius, because not long after that, Jim from East Lansing asked this question. He says, based on the offers so far, it seems like Tucker is aiming a bit higher for the stars. D'Antonio might not have aimed as high, but he was credited for great evaluation. So his 3 stars, in some cases, turned out to be 4 stars who had been under-evaluated. How do you think this crew is on evaluation? Well, interesting that Jim from East Lansing thinks that Tucker's aiming higher star-wise, whereas Cornelius Spartan thinks that they're still looking for the 3-star profile. Seems to me like it's a smattering of both. You get 3 stars in Louisiana or Georgia, I mean, they could be as good as you want them to be. The 4-star Beavers out of California is an interesting one. Top 200 nationally. Michigan State's still in it, I think. Arizona State and some other schools. But I was trying to think if they get Beavers, Beavers came in with a group of California kids. They visited. I think it was California spring break week. They came in and visited that coaching staff. I can't think of the name of that coaching, that 7-on-7 team out there in California. Anyway, Tucker got in good with that group when he was at Colorado. Tucker gets a job at Michigan State, still in with those guys. They bring him out, and Beavers was impressed. Michigan State's in it. If Michigan State gets that guy, I mean, a 4-star from California. I can't remember. I was trying to think when's the last time Michigan State had a guy, if they get him, a recruit ranked that high from California. And I can't think of one. One name that comes to mind, remember Tyrone Crenshaw? I'm sure old Tuck does. Tyrone Crenshaw was a running back, signed, I think, 1994 with Perlis. Running back. I think he was from Pasadena, and he was like he was a good recruit. Then his senior year had a great year and was like the Los Angeles, like the city, like player of the year. Michigan State got him. That's back when Michigan State was still trying to promise, hey, you can come here and be the next Lorenzo White type of thing. Get the ball 40 times a game. So they got Crenshaw. Crenshaw might have gotten a couple carries in 94, 95, and then was not in the program very long. Then Saban was hired and Crenshaw was gone. But where was Crenshaw ranked? I'm not sure. I'd have to look that up. Back then you had Alan Wallace, Tom Lemming, Blue Chips Illustrated, and Max Empfinger. That's about it. There were not a lot. Prep Star was probably around then. I'm not sure. That was before the internet. So people didn't even refer to people as 4 stars and 5 stars. That part of the lexicon had not even come into existence yet. Back then, they were called blue chips. You're a blue chip recruit. And Crenshaw, I would think, was the most blue chip of blue chippers around that time. Was Demetrius Martin from California? He came in as a wide receiver and corner. He might have been from out east. I know he's coaching out in California now. Tony Banks came in as a JUCO. He's a junior college guy. But in terms of high school, if they get Beavers, I don't know. In the internet era, it would be the highest ranked California recruit they've had. So in that regard, that's a wider net. That's an ambitious net, and they're not going to stop there. So you'll see the 3 stars, and that's where Michigan State's rubber has to meet the road. You're not going to see Michigan State going out and signing 20 4-star recruits, I don't think, like Ohio State, Penn State, some of these other schools. They'll have more of them, I think. Will they do it this year? Not sure. In the future, I would imagine, especially if he starts to win in a little bit. So question number 8, Hayden. Oh, and also Jim from East Lansing asks, how do you think this crew is on evaluation? How good of evaluators are they? It's a great question. I have no way of knowing. None of us have any way of knowing yet. First of all, they've not gotten any commitments. So, I mean, that's how well they do, how good a job they do in evaluation. That's something that can only be measured 3 or 4 years down the road. Hayden from Lake Odessa says, how big of an impact will the cancellation of camps hurt Michigan State for recruiting this year? Great question. And it's going to hurt Michigan State. It's going to hurt a lot of schools. It won't hurt Ohio State because they're Ohio State, first of all. Secondly, they already have, 15 or 16 commitments. But Michigan State with 0 commitments for obvious reasons, getting a late start, getting a late coaching change. I thought that Tucker, doing a lot of energetic things here early on, was poised to really have a good first year of camp. And I thought he was poised to tip some of those people over the edge back toward Michigan State. He's starting to do that with some of the in-state guys. Whether or not he can get those guys to totally come over the line and become Spartans, they're working on it. We'll have to see how that goes. Getting them on campus for spring practice and for a camp would have really helped. They're fighting a comeback battle with some of those guys in southeastern Michigan. Not having the camp is going to make it harder to get those guys. So it also hurts in terms of evaluation. Most programs in the country utilize their summer camps as a means of evaluating recruits when they come in, get to see them in person, size them up, see how they move, put them through some drills. D'Antonio was great with the defensive back drills at camp, putting them through some some drills to measure change of direction, explosiveness, ball skills, all those things. I mean, I go to all the t-shirt camps, Adidas three stripe camp, Rivals camp, Sound Mind, Sound Body camp, Best of the Midwest camps, and none of those places, and they test the defensive backs, but nobody tested defensive backs at any of the camps like Michigan State did. To the point, I remember watching Kari Willis at Michigan State's camp, and he did not do well with those defensive back drills. Then he goes out at corner and was getting beat. And some people on the staff at Michigan State were like, man, I don't know if we should go ahead and continue to offer this guy or not. But Narduzzi continued to like him, and D'Antonio continued to like him. And it turned out to be a great decision. Kari Willis, captain, great person, leader, and now he's a pro. So even if some guys might not be great with all the paces, in terms of Kari Willis, that was not the end-all, be-all. Now, Kari Willis was primarily a tailback in high school, and he was a good tailback. He was hard to tackle. Good speed, good moves, and just hard to bring down. I think he could have been a good running back at the MAC level. Maybe could have been good for some Big Ten teams. I don't know. But was a safety, obviously, and a very good one. But with Willis, because he was a tailback and also spent a lot of time with basketball, so his defensive back skills and footwork were raw, and good speed, not great speed. So I mean, Narduzzi and D'Antonio, you talk about evaluation, that one was correct. But my point is, those defensive back drills that they put them through at the camp were so difficult that a future NFL player struggled with them. Okay, so Mel Tucker from the Saban tree, I'm sure that they would put through the guys through some great defensive back drills also. Harlan Barnett with Tressel, coaching the defensive backs. I'm sure it's going to be the same difficult defensive back drills at Michigan State's camp, but no camp this year. So that evaluation piece, it was that evaluation piece that caused Barnett to fall in love with Trey Waynes when he came and camped from Wisconsin one summer at camp. Would they have offered Trey Waynes on high school film? I don't know. So you don't have camp. It cuts off an important evaluation piece. So bit by bit, there's these things that are being taken away from these programs. And every program is in the same boat. It's being taken away from all of them. I'm sure camps will be off limits in every state eventually. But it hurts Michigan State more because, A, they don't have any commitments. They're working from behind on these. B, sometimes you have people at camp for consecutive years. They come in after their sophomore year, you keep them in mind. Then they come back for their junior year, you see them again. Well, this staff, maybe Tressel and Burton have an idea about some of the guys they've seen in camp in the past, and that'll help. Especially Tressel, I imagine the entire defensive side of the ball, that'll help. For instance, when they were going after the Slade twins 2 years ago, those guys we mentioned here last week, those were 2-star recruits at the camps, started doing well at the t-shirt camps. They'd already camped at Michigan State the year before. So I don't know if this happened or not, but when the Slades started to do well at the t-shirt camps, and we reported about some of that at SpartanMag.com, we were the only ones reporting about the Slade brothers. I know that some of those coaches keep an eye on what's on our sites just to see what's going on recruiting wise. It's part of the thing. You got to know what's going on everywhere. Anyway, they knew about the Slades. When the Slades started doing well in the t-shirt camps, did they go back and look at last year's camp film again? Because they filmed their camp. So when you have somebody more than 1 year, that can help. Noah Kim, the quarterback commitment this year for Michigan State. He camped at Michigan State, I think, his sophomore year. And then his junior year didn't because he had a catastrophic leg injury as a junior in the high school state semifinals. But when Michigan State started recruiting quarterbacks, missed out on a couple. Kim came back, had a really good senior year. When it came time to evaluate Kim again. They knew who he was. They could go back and look at his camp film, but also they knew who he was. My point is, these coaches don't have that sophomore year with these guys. If you have to touch base with the recruit, they don't have that frame of reference. Some of them do. Tressel and Burton do, but on offense they don't. That's another reason that not having camp hurts. It hurts a program more that has zero commitments at this point. It hurts a program more that did not have camp here last year with this group. So that's part of it. But they're going to be strong in other areas. That just means they've got to be, pragmatic and resourceful in other areas. And they're not complaining. I mean, they're energetic guys. They're optimistic guys. They're going to continue to go after it. But yes, it will have a big impact, and I think that hurts Michigan State more than many other programs. Dan from Royal Oak says, what do you expect the offense to look like? Will it be base 12 personnel, 11 personnel? Well, 12 personnel, for those of you that don't know, means one running back, two tight ends. 1 and a 2 is a 12, one back, two tight ends. 11 personnel is one running back, one tight end. 21 personnel is two backs, one tight end. Two backs and one, 21. 20 personnel is two backs, no tight end. That's a rare one. Anyway, watching Colorado, they were mostly, Johnson talks a lot about the tight end being the MVP of their offense. Of course, a quarterback's the MVP of any offense, but they're really putting a lot of ownership into that tight end situation, making those tight ends, putting a lot of an area of improvement. A lot of area of emphasis on the importance of tight ends, blockers, receivers, everything. So you watch Colorado, sometimes tight end is attached with the offensive lineman. Sometimes he's an H-back over the B gap. Sometimes two tight ends, what Michigan State used to call silver, two tight ends, balance, outside zone, and then fake outside zone, come back, counter boot, drag. Like Iowa does that a lot. Michigan State does it. He's done it over the years too. Anyway, you'll see two tight ends, one back, two tight ends. That's 12 personnel. So you'll see some of that. And mainly they're 11 though. One back, one tight end, and three receivers. But the tight end, they'll feature that guy, especially if they get a good one. And he's got to be able to do it all. And there's some people out there that can do it all, but it's a difficult recruiting, more difficult recruiting find these days than it was in the old days, because you have fewer blocking-oriented tight ends out there because everything is spread in the high schools now. A lot of places, not everywhere. But what's the base going to look like? I'm expecting one back, one tight end is the main base. But there'll be times when one back and two tight ends. Sometimes under center, one back, two tight ends under center, looking like a Kirk Ferentz offense for a play. Maybe two. Question number 10, T. Gibson from Oklahoma City. Thank you for all you do, Comp. Thank you in Oklahoma City. What are your thoughts on Jay Johnson's offensive philosophy? Personally, he says, I was thrilled to hear him share that his approach is to play to the offense's strengths rather than pushing for balance. Well, he says he wants to be balanced. He says he wants to definitely have the threat of balance. He says every coach wants to have the threat of balance. If you can really run it, it helps you pass it. If you can really pass it, it helps you run it. So all coaches mainly want that. So I'm not sure he was looking to play to the offense's personnel strengths rather than balance. I think he wants a little bit of both. Getting back to his question, he says, while he admits that balance is important, it doesn't seem like he wants to force it if it's not there. I would agree with that. He says, it seems to be a major departure from Coach D's approach, which prioritized balance much to his detriment. So, will you see some... I'm sorry, that was a different question. Anyway, those were just talking points. In actuality, if you watch Colorado, formationally and play call, it's not much different from Michigan State the last few years. Last year, Michigan State was very much mainstream, I thought, with what they did, RPOs and, no huddle and all those things. So, and when I say mainstream, there's a lot of teams doing a lot of the same flavor of things. There's some nuances that are different, but it's not like in the 80s when you'd see some teams that played Perlis ball, and some teams played Schnellenberger ball. Although Schnellenberger would go two backs and be physical as well. But it's almost like I think there's like less variety right now with offensive schemes. You might beg to differ on that one, but those are words and good words, and I think Johnson's got a good philosophy. But I would caution you, don't expect him to reinvent the sport, okay? I mean, you're going to see, RPOs, some counter boot passing. You'll see some ground-oriented offense. And when someone goes ground and they don't pick up first downs and they punt, people get anxious about it. That's football. So I think he's going to be pretty good, but don't get your hopes up for 62 points a game because that's not realistic, all right? So, all right, Mike from Chicago says, Jim, can we expect to pre-order your book on the D'Antonio era of MSU football? I'm not writing one. He's just talking in terms of hypotheticals. He says, may I suggest the book being titled Find the Inches? Yeah, that is a good title. He says, I may have missed it given everything that is going on, but has SpartanMag put forth any in-depth media reflecting on Coach D's time at Michigan State, the ups and downs, the historical context? No, we've not done that. If we still had the magazine, that'd be something we would do. But the magazine had more magazine-type articles, longer shelf life, where we would delve into historical pieces and historical perspective. Since we've gotten rid of the magazine to focus on the website is more day-to-day news, and we put a lot of our man hours into that, and we only have so many man hours. So in order to cover, in basketball season, a press conference, game previews, post-game, you start getting into those newspapers style of not only the articles, but the pace of things. It doesn't leave you with many man hours left over for some of the articles we used to do magazine style. So no, in terms of D'Antonio history articles, we've not done any of those. And we don't have the magazine anymore. Shut it down 2 years ago to focus on the website. So no, not done it. Those stories are out there. And I would imagine at some point D'Antonio is going to be available for some of those type of interviews. I do think that we'll have a book someday. You guys have been asking for or people have been kind enough to request, a volume of dot comps, like the dot comps that we wrote at the Rose Bowl in 2010, 2011. The cluster punt play, some of those other ones. I think there have been enough of those. It would only take about 10 of them to put together a decent-sized paperback. I mean, if you have 10, maybe about 15 of them, because they usually average around 5,000 words. So the D'Antonio era.com, once I get my stapler together, I'll start stapling those, and maybe we'll put that together at some point. Thank you for asking. Let's go back to the chat questions. Detroit Spartan is speculating that Tom has had a couple of cocktails this evening. Well, I hope so. It's Friday night, and I invited everybody to pull up a beverage, so if he is, that's good. We endorse that. We promote that. We recommend that. It's good, healthy living. Brian V says, I think Tom is sniffing too much Lysol. We don't recommend that. Not so much. Hayden Vischer says, do you know which defensive unit Corday Hankton is working with? Hankton is listed as a defensive GA. I'm not sure what part of the defense he is working with. And that dovetails into a question. We'll go to question number 13. I'll jump ahead a little bit. Kurt from Freeland, Michigan says, first of all, Kurt says he's a longtime visitor to the free content, but newly a member, loving the content and community. Thanks, Kurt. Thanks. Appreciate that you stuck your toe in there a little bit with some of the free content, jumped in, and glad you're liking the content and the community. And the community is the strength of SpartanMag.com, the online community. And we promote it as the number one, the best Michigan State online community in the world, on the internet, anywhere. Good people helping each other, arguing with each other, and hopefully we provide some good content, and we want to get better all the time. And he says it looks like the staff is aiming for some new markets like St. Louis, Louisiana, and the West Coast that we aren't as familiar with. Anything you can tell us about the programs in those areas? How is our brand there? It's a good question. You know, a lot of people have worked really hard to help Michigan State's brand out on the West Coast. The Orange County Spartans have been good with D'Antonio over the years. How does that help recruiting? Well, it can't hurt. Like I said, you know, Tucker had some a lot of dealings with California programs, including the summer AAU football, like the 7-on-7 teams, when he was at Colorado, and they signed a handful of good players from Colorado and one or two from Louisiana. So that part of it has traveled with Tucker. You can see that coming to Michigan State, he wants to keep those networks open. I wouldn't call them a pipeline necessarily. They didn't really have a pipeline to Colorado. They were maybe the beginnings of a Los Angeles or California to Colorado pipeline. And it's a great time to recruit in California right now. Last year, I looked it up and I can't remember the exact numbers, but something like you take the top 25 players in the state of California last year, and I think the number is 24 of them. 24 of the top 25 players in California signed outside of the state of California. They didn't go to USC. They didn't go to UCLA. Sorry, that's another helmet. Oh, don't give me a demerit on that one. But that's the old UCLA. That's the fine pen, not the thick pen. That's the fine one. And the metallic gold. Not that weak, not that weak excuse for metallic paint that they're using on helmets these days. That's not right. That's not football. That's not the way it's supposed to be. I want that shine, that deep shine on your metallic helmets. And that includes when you bring this one out. It's the old one. I don't like to see what used to be a metallic helmet and have that dull, not even metal look. What are you doing with that? I digress. That's one of my pet peeves. Anyway, 24 of the top 25 last year in the state of California went out of state, didn't go to USC, didn't go to UCLA, didn't go to Stanford or Cal. So it's a good era in which to recruit in the Golden State. Mel Tucker wants to recruit out there. Michigan State's Big Ten's got a good brand. Pac-12 brand is down. Big Ten is solid. Michigan State, I'm not going to say Michigan State is the Dallas Cowboys brand-wise, but people know who Michigan State is. Mel Tucker goes out there in California, he'll get a foot in the door. What you need to do is you need to get those California guys. It was always very hard to get them to come to campus. The new NCAA rules, which allow official visits in June and May, right up Michigan State's alley, and other northern schools that are trying to recruit in the Sun Belt areas. In the old days, they would have to pay their own way to come out here to visit. Now, with official visits in May and June, something that the SEC and the ACC did not want to happen because they don't want Southern kids and Sun Belt kids going up north to visit campuses in May and June when everything's pretty. The northern teams need it. A little bit surprised that legislation went through. Problem is, of course, this year there are no official visits for May and June. So it hurts in 2020. But in the future, I keep looking. I got to make sure that the microphone is on. That green light's got to be lit. I can just see right there. That's what I need to do. If that green light goes on, goes off, then we'll have a problem with the audio. So that's what I was doing there. That's why I do that. I'm not trying to get water out of my ear after swimming laps today or anything like that. So it's a great time for Michigan State to go out in California. Mel Tucker has had boots on the ground out there in the past. And I think it's going to work. I think they're going to get some players out there from California. I think it's going to happen. Will it happen this year? I don't know. But maybe they'll get one or two out of those guys that visited from a few weeks ago. We'll have to touch back in on that and see a little bit more about some of those players and see what they're doing in terms of who they're hearing from recruiting-wise following up. St. Louis, Was his name Isaac Thompson? Hickey Thompson's son. Hickey Thompson came to Michigan State back in the Perlis era. Was an excellent running back from St. Louis. Had some good moves. I remember watching him in practice. at the end of the 1993 season. Back then, we could go to practice and stay the entire practice. There was no internet back then. Coaches were not as paranoid about spies and so forth. I remember being there. When you get to November, it gets dark at like 5 o'clock. Practice would start at like 4:30. I mean, most of the practice is going on under the lights. If you drive by the football building to, anytime in November at the end of the season, you'll see the lights on. They're practicing, and it'll be 40 degrees or colder because it's November and it's nighttime, and the lights are out there. They're under the lights. You have to because it's dark, and you have to wait till kids get out of class. But I remember one night, Hickey Thompson doing some really good things with the scout team, making people miss and making some moves. There were bats flying around, and I wrote about it in the magazine, just talking about Hickey Thompson. In the magazine, we used to often, those of you that used to subscribed, we often wrote about the next men up, the scout team guys, the second teamers, the third teamers, the freshmen, the redshirt freshmen, how they're doing in practice. So I was watching that and writing about that. And we still do that a lot at SpartanMag.com. A lot of what we do at SpartanMag.com is we're always keeping an eye on player development. It's an important part of what we've done over the years. It continues to be that way. Thompson was a guy that I was excited about. He came in, he had big numbers in high school. A lot of guys do. But and I liked what he was doing in practice. And it was the point where he was making some moves, and like teammates were oohing and on about it. I just written some good stuff about him, and I mean, it was not that he read it, not that it had an impact, but I thought he was a running back that had a future. And he left the team. Can't remember why or what. I think he might have went to like Illinois State or Northern Illinois, something like that. But came in with a lot of publicity. That was pre-internet, but he was somewhat of a blue chipper. But Perlis was always bringing in running backs that had good numbers and were heavily recruited. Thompson was one of them. But anyway, his son got an offer from Michigan State. He is currently a sophomore in St. Louis. He'll be a junior next year, but that's an interesting one to watch, that's for sure. But the question here earlier was about Corday Hankton, and this question from Kurt from Freeland asking about Louisiana. So that's where these are going to come together. You asked about Hankton. I'll talk about Louisiana. Corday Hankton. So many people are like, who the heck's Corday Hankton? Corday is a graduate assistant at Michigan State. Came with them from Colorado. I just posted an article at SpartanMag.com, the Underground Bunker, about Hankton. It was written on the ColoradoRivals.com site, a really good feature on Hankton. Hankton was a graduate assistant, so interviewing a graduate assistant, interesting. Something we're going to have to look into. Talked about how, Hankton grew up in New Orleans, was on the New Orleans Police Department, with the police department, was a police officer in New Orleans for 5 years, also coached high school football. And Hankton's brother was a wide receivers coach at the University of Georgia when Mel Tucker was there. So Tucker got to know Hankton's brother really well. And according to Corday Hankton in that article, Mel Tucker was visiting Louisiana, recruiting the state of Louisiana. Hankton's brother and Tucker, they were in town, and Hankton's mom had made dinner for them. Hankton met him, got to know Tucker a little bit. And at some point, there was a conversation where Tucker asked Corday Hankton, what do you want to do with football? What do you want to do with your life type of thing? And Hankton was like, man, I want to be a coach full time. Tucker never forgot that. They struck up a friendship. And when Tucker left to go to Colorado, Tucker's like, boom, I've got a GA job for you. He went out to Colorado, served as a GA. Must have went pretty well because Tucker came to Michigan State. Not long thereafter, Corday Hankton joins him at Michigan State. Hankton, strong in Louisiana, coached there, was a police officer there on the force down there. Interesting. So some of these Louisiana offers you're seeing going out, they're not just blind darts at a map. You can bet that Hankton has some networking going on with a lot of those guys. Would not be shocked if Michigan State goes down there and gets a couple out of Louisiana on a regular basis. So Hankton's a GA now. Now, after his graduate assistantship is done, could he become a defensive analyst and remain in that role? Yes. He can't recruit off campus, but he can, through social networking, he can contact people in New Orleans and Louisiana and assist recruiting in that way. And there was a quote from Courtney Hawkins in that article at the ColoradoRivals.com site, which was written last summer. It said, quote, Coach Tuck wants to recruit in Louisiana, and it's there to happen. We want to keep the iron as hot as it can be in Louisiana, unquote. That's what Courtney Hawkins said about Louisiana recruiting when he's at Colorado, and I would imagine that he feels the same way now that he's at Michigan State. So that answers your question a little bit about Hankton. I don't know where he's recruiting defensively on the staff. I know Hazelton was talking about that he feels good about his GAs both in the back seven and in the front four. Or did he say front seven and the back four? Either way, they feel good about their GAs. Hankton must be one of them, but the recruiting piece is also going to be strength with that particular graduate assistant. All right, let's see. Let's get through a couple more of these questions. Brett from Bay City, Michigan. Jim, do you think there will be more recruits signing in the February period than has been in the last couple of years instead of the December one? It seems like if there is a high school season, coaches would be able to use senior film to make their minds up on certain players and therefore drag the recruitment out longer. I agree. I think that's an astute observation from Brett in Bay City. I think that would only make sense. I wonder, though, because college coaches, if they see other programs snapping up commitments and getting a lot of commitments, it's probably natural that some of these other programs are going to be like, well, we can't be left behind. We got to fill up too. Some programs will stick it out and do it at their own pace. Some won't. But your point is not getting a chance to have guys on campus in the summer. There's a chance you might not see high school football this fall. If that's the case, recruiting is going to have to be done on junior film this year for next winter, possibly. Scary thought. But if that happens, that means there's other things that are more important and more scary going on. I don't want to overstate the importance of high school football, but hey, we're here talking about football. It's part of the deal, right? So that's why recruiting right now is really interesting for the spring. I mean, recruiting is always competitive every day of the year. It's always competitive in the spring, some of the early commitments. But right now, coaches at various programs know who they like. And it's a limited pool based on junior film. It's a limited pool of who they like because they're not going to see anyone in camp. You might not get any senior film, so you know which guys fit the bill right now. So there's a lot of hustle right now to get those guys that you know. And Michigan State's pushing, trying to get in with some guys. No commitments yet. We'll see how things happen here in the coming weeks. But I mean, that's why you hear about Michigan State's coaches are texting and social media contacts, FaceTiming with recruits a lot every day, hitting recruiting hard. Because of what I said, it's a limited pool of players that you know and feel good about. After those players are gone, then you're going to be grasping. You're going to go back to junior film and looking at guys when they're 16 and trying to project what they're going to look like when they're 19. Wow. Recruiting right now, there's a lot of attention right now heading toward the NFL draft as being the only game in town besides WrestleMania. But it's the only game going on. Well, I'm here to tell you, football recruiting is going on strong right now too. A lot of players might not be ready to make commitments because, they want to go to camps. They want to make more visits. There's no reason for them to hurry up and make a commitment, but there is reason for the college coaches to push harder to get in on players sooner right now this year than I would say ever before for the reasons I just mentioned. Let's see, one more question here, and then we will go. As far as the other assistant coaches, the other, the grad assistants, Corday Hankton is one, Jack Harris is one, Jack Tab is one. Harris and Tab are offensive GAs. I've not looked into their backgrounds yet, but it'll be interesting to check that out. As far as analysts go, Michigan State has TJ Hollowell on defense, Ephraim Reed on offense, Dalman Gibson on special teams, and then Travaris Tillman is a senior defensive assistant. I'm not well versed in their backgrounds yet, but I guarantee. Okay, we just got Corey's telling me that Harris is he's the offensive line GA, so Corey knows that. Good on Corey. Thanks for that one. So the background on these guys, where they're coming from. There's a story there. We'll be checking that out. And I'm sure that they weren't grabbed blindly out of a bag. Tucker seriously knew what type of guys he wanted when he got the keys to the big rig. All right, Steve in San Diego. This is a deep one. Since today is the 20th anniversary of the national championship basketball game, what are your memories of that game and the scene in Indianapolis? Pull up a beer. I could talk about that for a long time. I mean, I'll try not to go too long on this. I already talked a little bit about the one shining moment thing and how I kind of lurked into some photos on that. Just kind of wandered into those. If you remember the wandering guy from Saturday Night Live years ago, I kind of did that number. I remember staying at a hotel, basically a motel out by Indianapolis Motor Speedway. Had a roommate for that, a guy from the student radio. I was placed with him by Michigan State's sports info guys at the time. The sports info guy at the time at Michigan State was a guy that gave us, Spartan Magazine, the short end of the stick on a few things, a few too many times. Ended up getting that ironed out, and it turned out okay. He's no longer around. But having a roommate in a motel, I don't want, white collar problems, right? But we had a good time. I made it work, but looking back at it, whatever. Interestingly, that was March, and race teams were practicing at Indianapolis Motor Speedway. You'd hear Indy cars turning laps in March. So that was interesting. Gosh, a lot of my memories about these NCAA tournament teams, and I've been to 74 straight, mentioned that last week. 74 straight Michigan State NCAA tournament games going back to 98. I'm sorry, 99. I didn't go in 98. But a lot of my memories from a lot of those tournament runs, especially late in the tournament, revolve around my old college friends. And I'm sure a lot of you are the same way. Friends of yours from college that you reconnect with various places in the country at various times. And that's one of the great things about going to Michigan State. One of the great things, not about going to Michigan State, but one of the great things about major college sports is those major college sports help many of you, and certainly myself, helps us stay in contact with our college friends. I've been out of college for close to 30 years. And a lot of those guys, they're going to come back to Michigan State football games because it's a thing. And I live here. So when they come to town, Comparoni, what are you doing? Let's go to the Peanut Barrel. Happened last September. My friend Jay, if you're watching, he showed up. He lives in Minneapolis. Bundy lives in Minneapolis, some of those guys. Joe. They hadn't been in town for a long time. But some of them, I should have ran into them out in Arizona State the year before they went out to the Arizona State game. But they were in town for the Arizona State game in East Lansing. Went out to the bar with those guys the night before the game. It was great. It's great. But it's football that helps bring us together. Major college football. Event like that, had a lot of friends from Atlanta and Chicago, met up with them in Indianapolis. And I remember hanging out with them before the game and after the game and staying up late and having a great time. Memorable time. And after the game, we're at the bar, and I think we were at Steak and Shake. No, I think we drove through and got White Castle on the way back to hotel. One guy was driving safely. And Anyway, my Steak and Shake memory must have been from maybe a night or two earlier after the Wisconsin game. Just being at the Steak and Shake in Indianapolis. If you've been in Indianapolis, you know the Steak and Shake. And being in line because it's 1 a.m. and there's a line. And, you got your drunk crowd a little bit. But there in line with us was Digger Phelps. It's interesting. Didn't talk to him, but it was interesting. That same Steak and Shake, after 2013 when Michigan State beat Ohio State football, the Langford run at the end, Mumphrey had a touchdown reception. Conan Dyke and I were at that same Steak and Shake about 3 a.m. And Keith Mumphrey was there getting something to eat. Good young man. Congratulated him on his touchdown and his Big Ten championship. He was just out getting something to eat at 3 a.m. And he was behaving himself a lot better than Paul and I were. But 2000, I talked about the one shining moment thing. That was a big deal. Obviously, but I remember Izzo on the court. I got on the court soon after the game was over, and I just wanted to see who Izzo was talking about. And he saw Ganakis. Gus Ganakis was like walking along and Ganakis was like walking behind the press row behind all the computers and everything. And Gus was looking out at Tom, and he was like, Tom, as he was walking. And I happened to be behind Izzo's shoulder, so I see Ganakis like saying, Tom, as he's walking, Tom. Like he couldn't wait to get to him to congratulate him. And that's just like a mental video, a mental picture that I've never forgotten. I asked Tom, I'm like, why Gus? Why are you excited why was it a big deal to embrace Gus at that moment? And Izzo said, because he's the best. That's what Izzo said about Gus. I remember that. For some reason, that sticks out. The one shining moment thing, of course. I remember being in the corridors of the stadium at the Hoosier Dome. And there was the post-game interviews with Cleaves and Peterson and probably Bell. And they were done. And they were leaving those interviews and walking back to the locker room. And I was walking with them to go back to the locker room to interview more players. And as we're going down the hallway, Irvin Johnson Jr. is in the hallway, also known as Magic Johnson. You might be familiar with him. He was standing there with his hands behind his back against the wall. And he might have been with, I don't know, I can't say for sure who he was with. But he was with somebody of note. Steve Smith, maybe? I don't think it was Kelser. But he was just kind of hanging out there. Magic was sitting there watching him walk by. And Magic said to Cleaves, and again, I'm just wandering around following all this stuff, observing it. And Magic watches him walk by, and he's like, hey, champ. He said to Cleaves. Then here comes Granger or something. What's up, champ? Here comes Charlie Bell. How's it going, champ? So now, I mean, Izzo's known, Magic has known these guys for a long time. In some regards, he's known them since they were teens. And he knew them as Mateen and Charlie or whatever. But now, for the first time, Magic is addressing them as champ, which was interesting. I don't know. I've not gone back and watched that whole game from start to finish. It'd probably spark a few things. I've watched bits of it. When I've watched the early moments of that game, the forward of the boards was really hitting hard. Charlie Bell with some offensive rebounds. And I mentioned earlier with an article that I did at SpartanMag.com this day in Spartan history after commemorating the Syracuse game when they were down 14, came back and won by 15 or whatever it was. That Syracuse was one of the teams that really used the forward of the boards against Michigan State. They had 3 or 4 runouts in the first half in building that 14-point lead. You go forward of the boards. If you miss forward of the boards and you don't get the rebound, Syracuse out of that zone was ready to go. And Michigan State paid for it for half the game that night, but they had the forward of the boards revved back up for the national championship game against Florida. The other thing in terms of X's and O's, Florida was renowned for their full court pressure. They were turning everybody over, wearing everybody down. And how can Michigan State, from the Rust Belt North with slow athletes, deal with Florida's press? And yeah, even in basketball, you'd hear those things. And I was like, man, you guys don't know Michigan State. Because at that time, Michigan State had been to 2 Final Fours, but the Izzo thing, he was in year number 5, and he was big, but he wasn't the Hall of Famer yet. And even when they had Heathcote, with some of those stodgy teams, they could always run. And if you pressed, they could really bust up a press. Heathcote talks about that in that Georgetown game. Georgetown had a great press. And Heathcote, everyone was asking Heathcote about how they're going to deal with Georgetown's press. And Heathcote couldn't wait to face that press because Heathcote was very good at beating presses. And they beat that Georgetown press. They beat it pretty bad early, and Georgetown took that press off. I mean, it had happened in, when Heathcote won the Great Alaska Shootout. Remember Arkansas with the 40 minutes of hell? They played Michigan State. Michigan State beat them by 15 or 20. And Arkansas was a top 10 team. Who's this Heathcote team coming out and beating them? That's what they did. They destroyed presses. Izzo did it. 1998? Michigan State lost to Connecticut at Connecticut. That's back when Calhoun pressed early in his career. Never quite got over the hump. But they pressed. That's what they did. They pressed Michigan State in Connecticut, and Michigan State destroyed the press for about 25 minutes, 20 minutes. Connecticut took the press off, which they rarely did. Connecticut came back and won that game, but Connecticut didn't press. And it's around that time that UConn stopped pressing. And it wasn't until they stopped pressing as a team that they started winning championships. And that lent to Izzo's philosophy that you can press if you want to, and it might help you avoid upsets here and there, but in March Madness, in the Sweet 16, when you're facing good teams, press is not going to work against those teams. He always believed that, and he felt like it could work for some teams. He used it in 2005 because he had so much depth that he wanted to tire out his own team so that players would play 19 minutes and be exhausted and not complain about not getting enough playing time. That team went to the Final Four. It's the only time they've ever pressed. But so Izzo didn't feel like it was. He didn't want to spend time working on something in practice that would not help him in the NCAA tournament. So that's why it's allocation of resources. Time is a resource. He didn't want to spend time on it. He didn't think it was a frugal usage of that resource. They lost to Louisville, who pressed the Draymond Green team. Was that 2012? That Louisville team, a pesky press that didn't trap all out. See, the Izzo Heathcote system is very good at beating a team that goes all out to trap to beat you. They use it against you. Louisville was like a pesky press. They would trap a little bit, but they would just kind of wear you down and slap the ball for steals. It was a different type of press. And Izzo even said after the game, after that loss, that he was going to spend a lot of time looking at that again so he would know how to handle that differently the next time. That was a different type of puzzle that Izzo hadn't faced yet. And that, all coaches face something new at one time or another. I remember when Michigan State had trouble with Bruce Pearl's team with Tennessee in the regional finals in 2010, the way Tennessee iced ball screens, the side ball screen. That was kind of new for back then. And I remember when Michigan State would run their shot clock play, when it was a 35-second shot clock, you come down, you fast break, early offense, then you run your early offense, then you run a play, and if play doesn't work, then you get into your shot clock play when you get down to 10 seconds. Lon Kruger, when he was at Illinois, they would play man-to-man, and then with 10 seconds left in the shot clock, they would go zone. Michigan State had a basic but effective type of shot clock play that they would run, but it didn't work against Illinois because it didn't work against zone. They had to have a different shot clock play for a zone. But because Kruger had that curveball, and they beat Michigan State once or twice with it, Michigan State had a set shot clock play they used to use back then. It became obsolete. They had to change it. So even great coaches like Izzo, all great coaches have run into something that makes them change things, like Calhoun at UConn getting rid of his press. So X's and O's wise, Michigan State was going to have trouble with this Florida press. And I'm like, man, you guys don't know. You don't know. The Heathcote stuff, Arkansas, Georgetown, Michigan State against Calhoun in 98. Michigan State in December, I think it was December, might have been January, 1998. The game that was the turning point game of the Izzo era when he won his first Big Ten title in year 3. And year 3 did not start out well. They lost to U of D. They were having trouble. 2 straight NITs. Another NIT, and Izzo was going to be gone. They began the Big Ten season at Purdue. And Michigan State had an okay preseason at Purdue. And Purdue was preseason Big Ten favorite by a mile. Preseason national top 10, which was a big deal. Big Ten has been good in basketball over the years, but at that time, it's not like Purdue was preseason number 1. Big Ten didn't get that kind of attention back then. Purdue was the best team in the Big Ten, supposed to be. Michigan State's beginning the season at Purdue. Purdue that year ran full court pressure. Gene Cady pressed that year. Michigan State goes down there at Purdue, preseason favorite, Tom Izzo. Game 1 of the Big Ten season, likely to be his last season. Purdue presses, and Michigan State went through that press like a hot knife through butter, beat them by about 20, and it was like, what the hell was that? What the hell was that? They got momentum out of that, a level of sharpness, and Izzo was doing then what we didn't know he could do, but what we've all seen subsequently is he was getting better and better and better. Quality control, building. And that team came out of nowhere and won the Big Ten. Beat Eastern Michigan, beat Princeton, went to the Sweet 16. First Sweet 16 since Steve Smith in 1990. So that was 1998. And that run started with beating the hell out of that Purdue press. UConn destroyed that press. So now Michigan State's playing Florida, and this Florida press is going to beat Michigan State. Didn't turn out that way. So anyway, I got to wrap this up. I said I wasn't going to go long on that, but I blew it. I lie. Let's go quickly through these questions. The ones over here, that's the end of the mailbag questions. Right now we've got some more of these chat questions and accusations about Tom sniffing Lysol. Let's see. Dolly says, do you think the college football could be canceled this coming fall? Could be, yes. And, Herb Street says he thinks it's going to happen. Dabo Sweeney says, no, it's not going to happen. But Dabo Sweeney's a big, optimistic guy. Brian Kelly thinks somehow, some way it's going to happen. And we've heard a little bit of this. And Kelly said whether it starts on time or later in the fall, he thinks there's a solid chance for football. And, it's been leaked out. I don't know if leak is the right word, but there's been talk that, athletic directors are trying to prepare for any eventuality, any possibility, because they want college football to happen because that funds everything. And if they lose football, like the athletic director at Iowa State says, it's ice age time. If that happens, I mean, it'll destroy the finances. Of college football. If that happens in the fall, there'll be more important economic engines that'll be in severe trouble also. Not that football's not an important economic engine. Anything that anybody is doing for a living is important, even if it's football, right, people? But there's been talks about, plan A, plan B, plan C, plan D, one of the plans is, what if it takes a while and the curve flattens and things are okay in the fall? Could you conceivably begin fall camp in September and start the season in October, play half the season, come back and finish the season in the spring? That apparently has been discussed. I would not hate that. Dali says, would that actually be a good thing for Michigan State if football were canceled this fall? No, I don't think it's good for anybody. Hayden Fisher says, definitely not. Football is a driver of revenue for the athletic department. Hayden Fisher is correct. All right. Adamafikis, I don't know how to pronounce that, says, hey, Comp, should we expect any more transfers besides the UTEP punter? No specifics if it's paywall stuff, but have you heard anything generally? We don't worry about paywall here. I'll say anything that I know as long as it's not too controversial. Also, I don't get in trouble or out any sources that want to keep things quiet about something. But no, I've not heard anything about grad transfers. Would not shock me if something happens. And a lot of times, if a transfer thing is cooking, sometimes it's kept quiet so that other schools don't get involved. I've not heard anything, but if I were to anticipate a grad transfer anywhere, I would expect maybe a tight end. They need some help at tight end. And, sometimes there's a good player, maybe defensive end too, pass rusher, like the Dana kid from Central Michigan last year. If there's someone like that out there, would not shock me. Not heard anything, though. We'll keep our ear to the ground. Corey's really good at that stuff. He'll be the first to know. JLG Prod says, the hill was Peyton's Hill in suburban Chicago. Now, that might have been the case when he was a Bear, but when I thought that one of the things that Walter Payton said made him great was back when he was at Jackson State, there was a hill that he would run up back then when he was in college. Gurman Minhas says, hey, Jim, last alluded to 4th and goal every day, Alabama's relentless pursuit of perfection. Yeah, that's a book somewhere around here. Can't find it. Anyway, that's the Phil Savage book. Showed it last week. Phil Savage. Here it is. It's a good one. Phil Savage. It's about an inside look at Nick Saban's Alabama. Phil Savage was a general manager in the NFL, was on staff with the Browns back when Saban was with the Browns with Kirk Ferentz and Belichick's failed staff there with the Cleveland Browns. Savage, well-respected guy, a guy that I used to exchange emails with, 15 years ago. We tried to do, an X's and O's thing that was going on back then. Really good guy. And then he ran the Senior Bowl scouting for a while. Now he's back in the NFL, I think. But anyway, he ended up becoming the color commentator for Eli Gold on the Alabama radio broadcasting team. Saban, who controls everything, knew Savage, knew him well. And I'm sure he wanted Savage to be the color commentator for that. And Saban actually enlisted Savage to do the initial self-scouts every week. So if Alabama was playing, Tennessee next week, Savage would watch Tennessee film and put together an overview scouting report, big picture, and Saban would want that thing, I think, on Monday morning. And then from there, Saban would delve into deeper with the film and everything. Savage certainly on the inside at Alabama. And there's some interesting, it's good, there's a lot of, there's a few Michigan State things in here too. I'd have to go back and, I thought I made notes in the margin somewhere. Sometimes I'll dog-ear the page. Back in the old days, I could remember things, but I can't remember crap anymore. So, but that's a good one. But anyway, he's alluding to that book, and it is a good one. It's serious football stuff, and they talk about the Saban mindset of a recruiting picture of what they want a recruit to look like, which dates back to Gil Brandt, apparently. And it's no secret there. A lot of the coaches want the same type of guys, and Alabama is able to go get more of those type of guys. I mentioned it last week, and that Mel Tucker's from that same tree, and he's got a mental construct and the type of physicality that he wants to look at and get, and there's a certain look to them and certain parameters. That being said, a lot of people want the same type of guys, but in terms of defensive linemen, it's a finite number, and Alabama can get some of those guys, other programs cannot. Anyway, the question from Gurman Manhas says, would you recommend reading this? Yeah, if you're a big college football fan, it's good and interesting. If you're an X's and O's guy like I am, it's interesting. Not a lot of anecdotal stories about players or any of that stuff. It's behind the scenes football program stuff. Yeah, I think you should pick that up on Amazon. Yeah, get that book. If you're here watching this crap, listening to my crap, then you'd probably like that crap too. Because that guy actually knows what he's talking about. That guy's an expert. I'm just a reporter. Hayden Vischer says, Gurman, I purchased soon after that last live session, only about 50 pages in, but so far would definitely recommend it. So now we got a book club going on here, which is nice. German Minha says, thank you. Corey Robinson says, I think they will get underappreciated guys, talking about recruiting, but it will be big frame, big speed types. That's exactly what I was talking about. No tweener, no undersized, underappreciated type guys. That is exactly the point I was making about the Gil Brandt, Saban, Tucker mindset. Tucker's in that tree, same mindset. Corey Robinson answering there was answering a question an hour ago about recruiting, but it happens to pertain to what we were just talking about. Brian Bemis says, what could a recruit like Budden, bring to MSU as its first recruit? Budden is an excellent linebacker from Belleville. I agree with Corey. It'd be a great get. Detroit Spartan says instant credibility, instant impact. Yes, he would. I mean, if you get a guy like that, it's not quite up at the Will Golston level, but when D'Antonio got William Golston, that was like a little bit of a game changer in terms of Michigan State recruiting in Detroit. A couple years earlier, we thought that Michigan State was getting a game changer when they got Fred Smith out of Detroit Southeastern. And who was the other guy? The other guy was a good defensive back who I thought was a really good kid. He showed up here and was involved in, what did he do? Like stole a bike or something like that. He only lasted a couple of months and he was gone. Fred Smith never did much. Got a little bit too big to be a wide receiver. Didn't quite have the mindset to be a tight end. Tried him at fullback, but it takes a hammerhead philosophy to be a tight end or especially a fullback. It wasn't him. But at the time, Fred Smith was a big recruit. Didn't pan out. But Budden would be maybe in that Fred Smith caliber in terms of, an eyebrow raiser if Michigan State could get a guy like that. But this, you're talking, Tucker's been on the job for 6 weeks. I mean, when Michigan State got Fred Smith, it was a year and a half, I think. And then Golston was 3 or 4 years in. There'll be others. Tucker's going to get some others. But if they could start with him, that would be an interesting one. And I really think Michigan State would have a good shot to get him or maybe some others if it were the usual spring and summer. And I get it. Michigan also would have access to the usual spring and summer. But with Michigan State playing catch up and having some momentum, Michigan State truly has some momentum, even though Tucker is 0-0. There's some intrigue there. Anyway. Tepin, hey Jim, Joe Della says hi. Sincerely, his RA. All right, I've heard about you. Joe Della is the guy that I was talking about. Joe, he was one of the guys that came in for the Arizona State game, so I'm glad he says hi. And if Joe's watching this, I'm sure he's going to try to make fun of me about something because that's the way Joe is. He'll make fun of you and make you like it. Robin says, I don't know. He's a guy who necessarily swings a pendulum with others, but he is a talent. I don't know who he's talking about. Old Tuck says, what style of tight end will this regime prefer, Bob Organ or Ivory McCoy? One of each, I'd say. Ivory McCoy was a great athlete that never quite became the player that I thought that he could have been. He could really run, had a good frame. Remember when he was a senior, they had him at defensive end. That's how good of an athlete he was. But one of those guys that's a good athlete just never quite got it. Good kid, never quite got it. Oregon, big dude, hard to tackle. I'm a little surprised Oregon didn't get a cup of coffee in the NFL. I know he was slow, but he could block, and he had good hands. I liked Oregon, number 94. That was 1993, 1994. Detroit Spartan. Budden's friends with a couple of big-time recruits in Metro Detroit. That doesn't hurt either. In Michigan State with D'Antonio and Belleville, Michigan State had a good thing going with Belleville's coach, Davion Williams. And meanwhile, there was something with Belleville's coach. He was not happy with something that Harbaugh did. One of the Belleville players, was it, that had an unceremonious end at Michigan? Something happened there. Some of you guys know. What was it? And can't remember what it was. But Jermaine Crowell is the coach there. And Crowell, not the Jermaine Crowell that played for the Lions, a different Jermaine Crowell. Crowell tweeted something along the lines that I hope I don't misquote him, And I know I'm not going to misquote him because it was a big deal when it happened, and some of you might remember it. Crowell said something like that, that along the lines that Michigan wasn't going to get any more of his kids or something like that. Well, here's Bud, and we'll see what happens. Maybe it got smoothed over. Kerr was Muskegon Orchard View. Thanks, Old Tuck. Colin Meaney says, Corey, do you think we can get Anthony Beavers off the West Coast, or is he set for Arizona State? Corey Robinson answers that one and says, I would put him in the top group of linebackers Michigan State wants. I would put Brandon Buckner there with Tyler McLaurin, Aiden Hubbard in the top group of linebackers with Bud in right now. Hayden Fisher says, Corey, what's the shortest quarterback you think this staff will take? 6'2"? Rob South is the big toe of this operation, Old Tuck says. Rob South is the big toe of this operation. Made me laugh. Kirk Baldwin. Bob Organ was from Ludington. That's the one from Ludington. And then Oregon comes up in another conversation. Thanks, Kirk. What did I say? I was thinking Josh Kerr. Kerr was a tight end, West Michigan tight end. Oregon, West Michigan tight end. Thanks, Kirk. Appreciate that. Man, we got the A students in here tonight. We got the honors Spartan class here. Advanced placement Spartans. This is the advanced placement. It's not a class, but it's detention is what it is. So if Rob South gets another demerit, it'll be some other type of detention, some other dimension of detention. Old Tuck says Old Tuck is the bell cow. So we got a bell cow and a big toe. I've got to hurry up and do this because I'm going to run out of juice here on the camera. But there's some good stuff in here. I don't want to miss anything. Tanqueray and tonic. I lost my place. Here we go, Corey Robinson. I think it's ASU and Michigan State. I'm talking about for Beavers, the kid from California, top 200 kid. ASU has the coach he has a long connection with. I would probably take him staying on the West Coast if I was to pick today, but Michigan State is in striking distance. That's Corey's prediction on that one. Corey says they are flexible with the quarterback more than other spots, but I get the sense that 6'2" is a good guess unless a special talent comes around. All right, Hayden Fisher says, think we have a legit shot with Raheem Anderson. Raheem Anderson is a Detroiter that Michigan State recently reoffered. He's an offensive lineman, primarily a center. Michigan State reoffered him this week. He's a national top 200 guy. And Corey Robinson's answer is, I think it depends on how much he is targeted by the staff. He is more of a center. That doesn't necessarily jive with their needs on the offensive line, but he is a great talent. Old Tuck says, Kurt Prinz was another Seaway tight end from Reith's Puffer, number 95. Oregon, Kerr, Halleck, Kurt Prinz, all Seaway tight ends. It's Old Tuck. Oregon from Ludington, Kerr from Orchard View, Muskegon Orchard View. Ty Halleck from Greenville, Prinz from, I don't know where Prinz was from. Old Tuck's going to have to help me with that one. Hayden Fisher says, Comp, ever tried any of the seltzers? Most are gluten-free, low-cal, good stuff. No, I haven't, but thanks for your concern. Been meaning to do that. I could go into a story about that, but we don't have time. Corey Robinson says, the side and speed is different in the offers. NBA Daily says, hey, man. And then looks like Corey reviewed one of his posts. Amy Garland says, love the live chat, Jim. The amount of scholarship offers now are unprecedented, especially around the country. Curious as to what's your take on that style of recruiting from Coach Tucker. It's from Ty Garland. I think that gets back to a little bit of what I said a minute ago. Early offers right now because there's a shallow pool of what the coaches perceive to be somewhat known quantities. Known quantities meaning they see junior film, they look at it, and they're like, okay, we know we like these guys based on junior film. These other guys, let's wait and see them in the summer, or let's see them next fall. Well, there's not going to be a summer or a fall, so there's going to be more guesswork on those guys. So these guys on the known factor, there are battles going on right now recruiting-wise for those guys. Big time. So that's why the early offers, and people are just they're not coaching right now because there's no spring football. And so, I mean, all the coaches around the country are going big into the Zooms and the live chats and the FaceTimes. And that's what's going on right now with recruiting. Never been like this before, unprecedented. Corey Robinson says, hey, Ty, my take is Michigan State coaches will put in the work to evaluate recruits under Tucker. They will follow that up with staying in contact with the kids and building relationships. I agree. Detroit Spartan says, let's be honest. If we get good play from the quarterback this season, fans will love Jay Johnson, the offensive coordinator. If we don't, they won't like his offense. You're exactly right. And you could say that last year or the year before when the Workey was injured and the offensive line's injured. So if the offensive line's injured again, that also pertains to what you're saying. That also agrees with what you're saying. So I agree. Untitled Beer Ranking Show says, give your thoughts on Hoggard, Comp, Hogard. You know, I talked to the coaches about it. It's Hogard. Konendijk pronounces it Hoggard, and that's incorrect. And Konendijk's got me messed up on that. It's not Hoggard. It's Hogard. Worst case, we don't get another guard. Do you think he can and will do? And what do you think he'll do year one for the team? How will things change? Well, he's got to trim some baby fat. He's got to get in better shape. He's got to get programmed in. If they don't get another guard, can they get 15 minutes out of Hogard? Hogard, that's what it is. They're going to have to if they don't get another guard. And it's going to be a process. It's going to take some time. And something else just crossed my mind. I hope that we get a chance to see him in Moneyball this summer. We don't know anything about summer this year. Man, if things clear up, but fans don't like, when things do clear up, I think people are going to be a little bit skittish about getting back out in crowds. But if things clear up in June and we get to Moneyball in July, that might be a happy time. All right. Anyway, I don't want to get into that. But Hayden Fisher says, initial thoughts on Travion Ford offer. Corey, too late in the game. Corey says he plans to visit when life gets back to normal. The new staff should be a good fit for him, and he's excited to get to know them better. I'm talking about Travion Ford, sorry. Now, he's a defensive end. All these guys are juniors that we're talking about going to be seniors next year. He's a 4-star out of St. Louis, a national top 250. So, they can get him in to visit. The way it looks right now in terms of getting national 4-stars to visit Michigan State, it looks like there's going to be more of that than we've seen in quite a while. Detroit Spartan says, Comp, share your thoughts and some memories about Kevin Vickerson. So Vickerson's back on the staff now as a defensive analyst or assistant of some sort. Vickerson, great talent. Defensive line talents are rare, hard to find, but he had a lot of energy, and sometimes he had a short fuse. And I saw him at the Sound Mind Sound Body Camp maybe 5 years ago, and it was good to see him. And he's a smiling, happy guy these days. Had a nice NFL career. But I remember one time at practice, John L. Smith was the coach, and Vickerson arrived at practice and I think learned that he had moved from first string to second string. And he didn't like it. And he was throwing a fit. And he was leaving. And Eric Knott went and got him and brought him back on the field. And Vickerson put his helmet on and went through practice and won the starting job back and whatever. But that's Vickerson. Anyway, Hayden and Vickerson was right. He should have been starting, and he said a few other things. It was interesting. Let's see. Hayden Fisher says, I don't know what he's talking about there. Brad Fashenko, Jim, speaking of out-of-state Perlis recruits, what was Sebastian Small's ranking from North Carolina? Sebastian Small was another one of those running backs like Hickey Thompson, like Batman Holman. Came in with big numbers and a lot of ability. But then someone like Dwayne Goldburn would beat those guys out with less hype. Mark Renaud did some good things a little bit after that too. Sebastian Small. Remember, Michigan State was really recruiting Sebastian Small and Ricky Powers. Did not get Powers, got Sebastian Small. What was his ranking? I'd have to look it up, but Sebastian Small was like, did they, I don't know if they had national top 250s per se back then, but he would have been, Small would have been probably like a borderline top 250, maybe better, maybe a top 150. Came in out of North Carolina, pretty big time running back recruit, put on some bad weight, never quite made it, moved him to fullback, never quite took. It's back in like 1991, 92, somewhere in there. Scott Jackson says, Scott Skiles said to John Thompson, why don't you put someone in here who can guard me, or something like that. Probably did. I watched Skiles, that Georgetown game, watched it about 2 weeks ago. I had my son watch it because he was asking about Skiles. He saw Skiles' jersey up in the rafters. And we were out in the driveway playing basketball, and I was trying to do the wraparound pass to Larry Pollock, the Georgetown pass. And it looks simple enough, but I was never able to pull that off. And so I wanted to show him that game, so he got a kick out of it. He got a kick out of how demonstrative Skiles was. My son actually was laughing. He thought it was comical. Hayden Fisher says, favorite uniform combo since 2000, football and basketball. Basketball, I got to go with the 1979 Script State, I guess. Favorite uniform combo. After they won it in 79 with that, if I'm not mistaken, they didn't use that much in the years after that. Correct? Rarely. Favorite uniform combo, football. I just like, come on. I just like Spartan head helmet. That's one without a stripe, but the helmet I think is a great college football insignia. I think Michigan State across the jersey is a classic look. As I've said before, Michigan State was one of the first, maybe the first, to put the name of the team on the front in college football. They certainly popularized it in the 60s. Not a lot of teams were on TV back then. Michigan State, Notre Dame was on TV quite a bit. Michigan State. And then from there it became popular in the southwest part of the country. Texas, SMU, Sooners. You don't see it a lot, but Michigan State, I've got respect for that particular jersey tradition. And a guy that was who really liked that was John L. Smith. And he's one of the reasons that I've got that thought about that. I mean, I always thought it was a good look and stuff. Not flashy, but it's solid, it's strong, it's Michigan State. John L. Smith said that growing up out in Idaho or wherever it was he grew up. He said, he just remembers the Michigan State across the front. That's something that resonated with him when he was a teenager. So that's a guy, that's Michigan State for back then. And some of your old timers probably remember that. The old guard. I don't want to call you old timers. I call it the old guard. All right. Dakota Vanden Toorn says, bourbon lemonade or gin and tonic? Gin and tonic. Tanqueray and tonic. That would be my favorite refreshment. I can't have as many of them as I used to. I'm out of condition in that part of my game. I hope we've got no youngsters watching, any of the guys that I coach or anything, but I'm not as good at drinking as I used to be. I used to be pretty good at it, but it makes me tired the next day. It's poison, man. But in the right situation, with the right music and the right people, the right effervescence, Tanqueray and tonic is my refreshment of choice. Can't have too many of them, though. Shamdog123 says, give me your hottest MSU football take. I don't really know what a hot take is. A hot take, I think, used to mean, when the word came out 3